15th, 2022. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
The flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Hogan, will you take roll, please?
Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Elliott,
Here.
Trustee LaKind,
Here.
Trustee Ramos,
Here.
Trustee Romanello,
Here.
Trustee Shaning,
Here.
Trustee Stevens.
Here. Okay, before us, we have a agenda and a consent agenda. Is there any modifications to the agenda?
Yes, I would like to move resolutions 76-2022, a resolution approving IGA with Pioneer Lookout Water District for emergency interconnect between our respective water systems, and resolution 77-2022, a resolution approving an IGA with the town of Palmer Lake for an emergency interconnect between our respective water systems to the consent agenda.
Is there any? Okay, we have a motion, a second. Ms. Hogan, will you take roll on the motion?
Trustee Ramos,
Yes.
Trustee Shaning,
Yes.
Mayor Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee LaKind,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Elliott,
Yes.
Trustee Stevens,
Yes.
Trustee Romanello.
Yes,
That motion passes 7-0. We will move items 4A and 4B and make them consent agenda items 2H and 2I. Do I have a motion to, is there any other modifications to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as modified?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as modified.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Hogan?
Trustee Romanello,
yes,
Trustee Stevens,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Elliott,
Yes.
Trustee LaKind,
Yes.
Mayor Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee Shaning,
Yes.
Trustee Ramos.
Yes.
That motion passes 7-0. That takes us automatically to item 3A, ordinance number 18/2022. Ordinance approving preliminary and final planned unit development, Monument Junction West. Mr. Snow.
Yes, good evening. I will call up that presentation. Just one moment.
While he's doing that, can I make an announcement, Mayor?
Go ahead.
So the town of Monument has made an offer to Sheila C. Booth to be our new planning director. Sheila comes with over 20 years of experience. She's worked in cities such as Frisco, Texas, Plano, Texas, and as recently, she's worked for the city of Fountain and comes highly recommended by their city manager as the mentor of their current planning director. And currently she's working for the American Planning Association as their chapter administrator for the state of Colorado. So she will start working on October 31st.
Excellent. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, good evening. My name is Sean Snow. I'll be presenting this next presentation, Board of Trustees, Monument Junction West, Lot 5, preliminary final PUD, ordinance number 18-2022.
Mr. Snow, you might have to speak up a little since you're back there tonight.
No problem. But, oh yeah, thank you, Mike. Okay, so as you can see on the screen before you, project location. This project is located west of Jackson Creek Parkway, south of State Highway 105. Existing zoning for this area approved by Board of Trustees on June 15th, 2020, known as the Village Sketch PD at that time. The approved sketch PD identified the project area in question this evening for Lot 5 as multifamily with 15 to 25 dwelling units per acre. The sketch PD plan from the town's previous land development code describes it as a conceptual version of the preliminary PD site plan. In preliminary fashion, the sketch PD plan indicates the proposed uses and densities of the property, including open space, parks, and regional trail corridors and major planned roadways and utility services. February 7th, 2022, Board of Trustees approved resolution number 08-2022, a resolution approving a preliminary final plat for Monument Junction West, filing number 1. Monuments Land Development Code, section 18.01.310, discusses site-specific development plans that are subject to vested property rights, including an approved final PUD, an approved conditional use site plan, and an approved final subdivision plat. In this case, of course, we're talking about the approved final subdivision plat, which has led us to where we are this evening, which is to discuss the PUD. Additional zoning on this site includes the Woodmore Water and Sanitation District, which will provide both water and wastewater services for all development with the Monument Junction. Existing surrounding uses include the YMCA, I-25, vacant land to the south, and the remainder of the undeveloped Monument Junction parcel on the east side of Jackson Creek Parkway. Preliminary final PD and discussion tonight, covering 264 multifamily units, 24.7 dwelling units per acre. A lot of details on this slide. The applicant will go over all of this in more detail, but includes items such as a clubhouse, pool and tenant storage, 11 residential buildings, and 3 stories each for each building, and each building has 24 units. This map here, giving access points off of Jackson Creek Parkway, conceived of at the future streets known as Fat Tire Drive and Oktoberfest Drive. Those are the red squares that you see on the image. The plan, of course, was looked at through the lens of the Town of Monuments Comprehensive Plan, and the comprehensive plan lists numerous attributes and characteristics that we would measure a project through that lens to try to get an understanding if it is compatible with the type of land use on the map in place for the comprehensive plan. And in this case, you can see the map shows this area as a mixed-use development, contemplated as mixed use. Some of the policies related to that mixed-use type development are as follows. The first one here we have is allow for a wider array of land use types to meet changing community needs. So I'll go ahead and read through this so we can get an understanding of what our comprehensive plan says. Since sometimes some of the elements in our comprehensive plan might seem to contradict one another because there are lots of aspirational goals within that plan. In this case, the first one discusses this wide array of land use. The variety in residential density, type, and lot size and price point proposed will expand the housing options in Monument. In particular, there are insufficient housing options in the Town of Monument to meet growing workforce demand. The proposed multifamily will provide a more affordable housing alternative to serve the growing area workforce. Next policy would promote infill development on vacant land with attention to the vacant or underutilized land in and around the downtown core. The proposed development of this vacant and underutilized infill site located less than a mile east of the downtown core of Monument will diversify land use in the town and provide much needed housing options. Additional opportunity discussed in the comprehensive plan states with 2,389 gross acres of land available for development, the future land use plan provides an opportunity to move from single-use developments to a mix of complementary land uses. These uses can be developed into various activity nodes, thereby ensuring an appropriate balance of live, work, and play environments. This particular PD identifies the use as multifamily. This, together with the commercial uses, provides a mix of complementary land uses that provides a balance of live, work, and play environments. Additionally, planned developments provide more amenities than traditional zoning in return for greater flexibility. This is typically in the form of parks, open space, and trails. When approving planned developments, town looks at ways to locate dedicated land and trails to connect with existing parks, trails, and usable open space. More detail for how that relates to this development. The proposed development incorporates a loop trail. This will connect to the remainder of the development through a network of interconnected trail corridors. These trails and internal sidewalks will also provide non-motorized connectivity to adjacent developed areas by directing pedestrians to Jackson Creek Parkway's signalized intersection. This slide is included to highlight the entitlement process and how we've gotten to the point where we are this evening. And I did reference those dates a bit earlier. The sketch PUD was approved in June of 2020. The plat in February of this year, 2022, which has led us to where we are now for the discussion of the preliminary final PUD. Staff recommendation for this project: staff reviewed the proposals in light of code requirements that affect what happens on a piece of land, as well as how the proposal addresses the comprehensive plan. Planning staff must weigh the options and use the comprehensive plan as it is intended as an advisor and aspirational document that will guide the types of growth and monument. In the end, the town staff are obligated to pursue the approved sketch plan and final plat for the site that outline percentages of land use. In the sketch plan, commercial uses were given a lower land use percentage overall in comparison to mixed residential forms. Staff recommends approval of Monument Junction West Lot 5 preliminary final PUD based on the findings that the preliminary final PUD is in conformance with the review and approval criteria from the Town of Monuments Land Development Code Section 18.03.450 and 18.03.460. Planning Commission recommendation. This slide will cover the information and the vote as received by Planning Commission this past week. Planning Commission declined approval. Motion to decline from Commissioner Hours stated, I move, and I will go ahead and read through all of this so we can see what was said. I move that Planning Commission recommend denial of Monument Junction West Lot 5 preliminary final PUD because it fails to meet the following criteria from the Town of Monuments Land Development Code 18.03.450 preliminary PUD plan. D, criteria for review. The preliminary PUD must adequately address the following criteria in a manner consistent with the general public interest, health, safety, and welfare. The project provides a benefit to the town, such as increasing the variety of development to fill a need and or provide amenities for the benefit of the town residents. Part 7 said an appropriate relationship exists between use areas, both internal and surrounding, with adequate buffer areas provided if warranted. Part 13 said the plan is inconsistent with the town's comprehensive plan. More detail, town's 27 comprehensive plan, page 33 of 64, chapter 4 future land use and annexation plan states in the last paragraph, as new development proposals are submitted, it is critically important to maintain a balance between residential and non-residential uses to maintain the overall fiscal health of the community. Non-residential uses have a property taxation rate of 29% and the added benefit of potential sales tax and real property tax revenue versus 7.96% property tax rate for residential. And page 42 of 64 in the comprehensive plan related to mixed use, and which includes the plan unit developments, a mixture of non-residential and residential development that provides convenience goods, services, and employment opportunities, and a mixed use development should promote work, live, and play with residential use being subordinate to other uses. Part of my screen is blocked, so I can't read the rest of that. The motion was seconded, and the vote ultimately was in favor of the motion to decline 4-3. I will not read through these slides. These slides outline the code requirements that I referenced earlier for preliminary PUD approval, review, and approval criteria. And then this is 0.460 for the final PUD review and approval criteria. Lots of information there, but this is just highlighting, or this is just outlining what is in the town's code. This is, of course, what the Planning Commission used and what the Board of Trustees can use if they are supporting for approval of this PUD or denial. These are the conditions that help inform that decision. And now we're on, not necessarily the questions, because we have our applicant here to present. So let me get that presentation called up.
Is there any questions for staff prior to the applicant, or would you guys like to wait for the applicant? Okay.
All right, I'm calling up applicant's presentation at the moment here. Okay, we have applicant Andrea Barlow presenting.
Good entry there. Good evening, Commissioners. Andrea Barlow with, sorry, trustees, I beg your pardon. Andrea Barlow with NES representing Alliance Residential Realty, who are the applicants for this development. It's known as Monument Junction West. Lot 5 is the area we're looking at, and it is a combined preliminary and final PUD plan. Next slide. So this slide provides some site context. The overall development of Monument Junction is shown on this slide. To the east of Jackson Creek Parkway is the already approved Monument Junction Phase 1, which is 204 single-family residential units of different densities. On the west side, we have an area which we've identified the individual lots as was approved on the final plat, which was referred to by Mr. Snow, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And lot 5 is the area kind of in the middle there, a little further north. So this is the area we're talking about. It's approximately probably about a quarter of the overall Monument Junction West development. And in terms of the frontage of Lot 5 to Jackson Creek Parkway, it is 25% of the frontage of the entire length along the west side. So I just wanted to provide a little context there. Lot 4 on here is a development you'll be hearing as the next item on the agenda, which is the Burger Works application. And lots 1, 2, and 3 are proposed for commercial use as well. Lot 6 is a planned community facility. We don't know what that is likely to be yet. It has been touted for different things, but that is a future development. Tract A is a planned detention pond that will be combined as a park use. So there will be a park in Tract A. And then on the south side is the Midtown Collection at Monument Junction West, which has been submitted to the town. And that is for 129 single-family detached residential units, a little higher density. So that's the overall context for the development. Next slide. So originally this property was zoned PCD, Planned Commercial Development, with the Regency Park overlay. It was zoned and as PCD for many years. It's been owned by the previous property owner for many years, since the 80s, and was in commercial use, commercially zoned vacant property for many, many years. And in 2015, initially, they decided to try to rezone that to residential in its entirety. That was denied by the board at the time. And then we came back in 2019 with an application to rezone the property for the mix of uses that were subsequently approved in 2020. So more of a mix, including commercial, residential of different densities. So, so PCD was the zoning. Next slide. That has now been translated into. It was zoned for PD, but that was translated into a PUD zoning in the context of the rewrite of the zoning code. So that is the current zoning is PUD. Next slide. Mr. Snow set out all the criteria for the preliminary and final PUDs. So this list here is really a summary. A lot of them are the same. They overlap. So this is just a summary of some of the main considerations. Being in keeping with the approved sketch plan is first and foremost. Providing open space, trails, school land dedication, benefit to the town, a variety of development and housing types, appropriate relationship between uses on and off the site, circulation that's appropriate for the type of traffic that will be generated, phasing plan if appropriate, water and sewer utility services and all other utilities, and then plan design being appropriate for any major environmental characteristics, which there are none on this site. We reviewed that with the sketch plan, and there were no major environmental characteristics present. And then also looking at compatibility with neighbouring land uses and whether the project would have a negative impact upon existing and future development in the area and consistency with the town's comprehensive plan. So I'm not going to address every single one of those, but I'm going to broadly address the majority in there. And if you have any questions about others, I'm happy to answer them. So next slide. So this is the approved sketch plan, and this sketch plan was approved on June 15th, 2020 with a 6-0 approval by the Board of Trustees. And there was very little discussion at that time, in fact, none that is reflected in the minutes, about the multifamily residential portion or the density proposed. It was primarily discussing the densities on the east side, traffic, buffering on the east side of the development, and some questions about the commercial components. We proposed a mix of uses there, and included within that was 12.7 acres of multifamily residential, which we proposed at 15 to 25 units per acre. At that time, that we anticipated with that development a maximum of 745 residential units. Currently, the plans, as you saw from the earlier slide, are fairly advanced in terms of what we're proposing from a residential perspective. So on the east side, we have approved 204 single-family residential, currently 129 single-family residential on the south part of the west side, and then the 264 apartments currently before you today. So that totals 597 units, which is 20% less than was envisioned with the sketch plan. So we are proposing now a significant reduction in the number of residential units as a result of this current plan, which of course we always said sketch plan is very high level. We obviously need to come down into the details as we go through our detailed planning and design, and the result of that is a fairly significant reduction in the number of residential units. Next slide. So I added this slide because this is identical to the slide that was in the presentation for the sketch plan. So this is a slide we included in the presentation for the sketch plan showing what our development intent was. So we included in there again multifamily at 5 to 25 units per acre, a building height, as you can see on that south side, bottom part of the slide, for commercial or multifamily of approximately 45 to 50 feet. That was the development intent we identified with the sketch plan for the multifamily component. So maximum density of 25 units per acre, maximum building height of 50 feet, 45 to 50 feet. And we noted at the time that the PCD zoning, that was the current zoning at the time, which is now being replaced by the PUD zoning, that allow for a 50-foot building height. So we were trying to maintain consistency with the existing zoning. Next slide. So this is just a slide showing the approved plat that was approved in February of this year. That identified Lot 5 as 10.7 acres multifamily. We reconfigured slightly from the sketch plan layout. That is something that is probably the only change from the sketch plan, in that the commercial was moved to the north part of the site and the multifamily was consolidated in that north central portion. That was the only principal change. Staff at the time did not consider that to be a major change that warranted an amendment to the sketch plan. Sketch plans are supposed to be conceptual and high level, and we were actually reducing the size of the lot for the multifamily by 2 acres. So originally it was 12.7 acres for the multifamily, up to 25 units per acre. Currently we're proposing 10.7 acres, so 2 acres less for the multifamily at the same density approximately. Next slide. So this slide summarizes the proposal. So we're proposing multifamily residential, and this is a walk-up garden apartment development. So what that means is there's a fair amount of green space. You can see, particularly on the west side, there's some garden areas, lots of landscaping, surface level parking. That's very typical. Surface level and garages are very typical of a garden apartment. And the walk-up component means there's no elevators, and that's why generally they're limited to 3 stories. If you go above 3 stories, you're required by building code to put in an elevator. And these are very typical in suburban areas, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at a later slide. So we have 10.7 acres, 264 dwelling units. So if we were to apply that 264 dwelling units to the original 12.7 acres that was allocated for multifamily residential on the sketch plan, we'd be looking at a density of 20.8 units per acre. At the time, during the sketch plan presentation, I was asked about, actually with Planning Commission, I was asked whether it's likely to be the maximum of the 25 units per acre. And I said, you know, that's possible, but it's usually something less than that because you have to take into account streets, landscaping, and so on. In this case, the developer, the master developer, is developing the streets separately from this development. So if you net out the streets, then you're at that 20.8 units per acre because they've been taken out of the equation to service the development. They're being built by the master developer. So we're looking at a net area here. So in terms of density, we are less than that 24 units per acre, 25 units per acre, significantly. And our actual proposed density is 24.7 based on that netted out area, net of streets. The maximum allowed building height is 50 feet per the previous slide. We are proposing a building height of 43 feet. And that is the maximum building height to the ridge line of the roof per the definition of how you measure building height. And we have our own definition in our PUD plan, but even if you use the town's definition, it's measured at the midpoint of a pitched roof, pitched gable, mansard roof, whichever, as a sloping roof, is measured to the midpoint. So our actual building height per code would be 36 feet. We are providing more parking spaces than is required, and we're providing them in a mixture of primarily surface level parking, but also some garage spaces, carports, and we have the required parking for accessible spaces. Next slide. So this slide, next few slides are going to look a little bit about setbacks and buffers. So we are providing a buffer to the north because the adjacent lot will be commercial development. So there is a need for buffering between non-residential and residential. On the west side, we have a 55-foot utility and drainage easement. So that requires the buildings to be outside of that easement area. So we actually have a 55-foot setback on that side of the development, which is more than was originally planned. On the sketch plan, that showed 25 feet, but because of that required utility easement, we are at 55 feet. On the south side, we have 15 feet, and then on the east side, we have a 15-foot building setback to Jackson Creek Parkway, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But when we presented this plan to staff, they were very keen on us having that presence on Jackson Creek Parkway to create a more interesting street scene and also to create that presence on what they saw as Jackson Creek Parkway moving to be a future multimodal street. It's going to be a major collector, 4 lanes in the future. And that's going to include sidewalks and bike lanes. So by creating that closer presence to the road, they preferred to have that active street frontage and put the parking behind the buildings. So screen the parking with the buildings and provide a more active frontage. So that was very much encouraged by staff when we had our pre-application meeting, and that's the approach that was taken to the development and design of this site. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about a couple of comments that have come forward during the process. And I will say that with this application submittal, we had one letter, one comment letter during the process. We didn't have a huge amount. You know, we usually get a lot more comments to a project than just one letter. But I'm going to focus on some of the comments in that letter. We did have a meeting with the Safe Monument Group before the Planning Commission meeting, so probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and talked about some of these concerns and tried to address them. So some of the things I'm setting out here have already been discussed with that group, and just wanted to highlight some of the key points. So there was a question about whether the Regency Park PCD setback should be applied. Clearly they shouldn't, because we have rezoned out of that zoning. So there is no longer that overlay no longer applies to this site. The PUD standards for this site were set with the sketch plan. But I just wanted to point out that Jackson Creek Parkway is a major collector. And if you were even to look back at the Regency Park standards, you can see that a collector has a 20-foot setback requirement. So I just wanted to verify that. There was some reference to it being 25 feet. So it's a 20-foot setback requirement if that were even to apply to this site. It does apply further south in Jackson Creek, on Jackson Creek Parkway, for areas that are still within Regency Park. Next slide. Comparisons were made with other projects, particularly the vistas at Jackson Creek Parkway. This a setback is measured from the property line. It's important to remember that. It's measured from the property line, not from the edge of pavement of the street. So the distance from the edge of the property line to the building, and I've assumed there is a slightly, we're looking from the roof level here, and there is a slight overhang of the roof. So I've taken it a little bit further back, and you're at 20 feet there. So that 20 feet distance is consistent with other developments in the area. Obviously, it's further to the edge of the pavement there, and I'll show a slide to discuss that with regard to this project. Next slide. So we measured our building setback. So we have asked for a minimum of 15 foot from Jackson Creek Parkway. And that is really because of the one pinch point on the site where the balcony from the building is about 17.5 feet from the edge of the property line. And that's only in one location. You can see from this slide that there are multiple locations where the setbacks exceed 20 feet and the average is about 23 feet. So we are meeting that previous expectation of the setback from Jackson Creek Parkway. Next slide. So this is a diagram that kind of shows a couple of different things. First of all, it's showing the actual building height of 43 feet compared to the maximum that would be allowed. And as I say, you can take it to 36 feet to the midpoint of that sloping roof. Our minimum setback of 15 feet to the property line is identified. The PL there represents property line. And then between the property line, so we have a landscape area within that 15 feet, and that's, like I say, is about 17 feet to the balcony and about 19 feet, just under 20 feet to that nearest building point. But from that property line to the edge of the pavement of future Jackson Creek Parkway is a total of 41 feet from the edge of the building to the edge of the curb. So there's a fairly substantial setback from the street itself. So the buildings are not going to be 20 feet as you're driving along Jackson Creek Parkway. They're not going to be 15 feet or 20 feet from the edge of that road. They're going to be set back about 40 feet based upon the requirements for a sidewalk and a tree lawn along Jackson Creek Parkway. And this plan obviously assumes a widened Jackson Creek Parkway, but the parkway will be widened to the east. The existing 2 lanes of Jackson Creek Parkway will basically form the future southbound lanes, and the future northbound lanes will be an extension to the east, just to give that some perspective. So that is really to the edge of the current curb line of Jackson Creek Parkway. Next slide. So there was quite a lot of discussion as well about impact on the mountain views. That is something that is referenced in the comprehensive plan. So we wanted to look at that a little bit more detail. Again, to provide some context, there are 4 buildings proposed along Jackson Creek Parkway, apartment buildings, and then there is a clubhouse, which is single story. So I'll show some elevations of those shortly. But that frontage of lot 5 is about, as I mentioned before, 25% of the entire length. So the entire length is about just over 3,100 feet, and the length of lot 5 is about 800 feet. So that's about 25% of that entire area. So to the north, lot 4, you'll be looking at that plan next. That's a single-story building. Single-story buildings. It's a drive-through, and it will be set in the center of a drive aisles and parking, so it's going to be set back. The other lots 1 through 3 will be commercial as well, and they're likely to be single-story buildings. Lot 6 is likely to be maybe a single-story, 2-story building. The Midtown Collection is going to be a kind of, it's a single-family detached, and that's going to be residential scale. So it's not as if you are going to have a wall of buildings along the entirety of Jackson Creek Parkway. In addition, we have at least 40 feet between each of the buildings. So I just want to provide that context. And next slide, what we sought to do here is provide a visual, because there was a lot of discussion about we're not going to be able to see the mountains. And one of the things, if you noticed on the previous slide, was the buildings are on the curve. So you're coming around Jackson Creek, and as you're driving down Jackson Creek, you're looking towards the mountains. The mountains aren't to the west of that point because you're coming around that curve. And it isn't until you get further around that they move over. And same with the the mountains don't move the road. As you're driving around, the road moves. You move with it. So as you're going north on Jackson Creek Parkway, at this point, you're really not looking at the mountains either. So this plan just shows the scale of the buildings adjacent to Jackson Creek. And as I said earlier, the ultimate plan for Jackson Creek Parkway will be that these 2 lanes will become the southbound lanes, and there will be the widening in the currently green area that you see here to the east. So this is really the street scene. You can see the clubhouse in the foreground and the 3-story garden apartments along Jackson Creek Parkway, which really is not blocking the view of the mountains. Next slide. So here I'm going to go through these a little quickly because these are just showing the elevations of the buildings. There are a couple of different color schemes. Each building has 24 units. There are 12 1-bedroom units, 12 2-bedroom units in each. So throughout for the whole development, it's evenly split between 1 and 2 bedrooms. As noted, they're 3-story walk-ups. The height will be 43 feet to the top of the roof, and they're a combination of stucco, stone, and wood materials. Next slide. This is just showing an alternate color scheme, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. Next slide. This is an indication of the 1-story clubhouse, which will be on the corner of Jackson Creek Parkway and Fat Tire. That will include a leasing office and some amenities, recreational facilities. Next slide. Mr. Snow talked a little bit about the open space and parks trails, overall context. As I noted, the green area to the south of our site is proposed for a park that will include a detention pond, and it will be laid out as a ball field, as well as having some stepped seating and a play area. There is a proposed public trail that you see go along the western boundary of the development, and it will continue to the south through the Midtown development. And then there will be an internal sidewalk connection to connect to that trail, and also internal trails to connect to the residential. Within the development itself, so actually on the apartment site, there will be open lawn areas, grills, tables, benches, a dog park, some hammocks, a couple of disc golf play areas that will be along that and western boundary. So amenities for the residents and also amenities for the overall development that it will be connected to. Next slide. The next few slides are really just a recap of what was presented with the sketch plan regarding the road improvements. So as I noted, the plan is for Jackson Creek Parkway north of Higby Road to be widened to 4 lanes. The developer of Monument Junction is taking responsibility for the improvements from Fat Tire Drive to 105 and associated improvements in that location. The remainder is with the town, and the design is underway for that. Next slide. So just to reiterate the actual improvements, so the first one to note is that there will be an eastbound right turn deceleration lane and free right turn lanes onto from 105 onto Jackson Creek Parkway. So that doesn't exist today, and that is going to significantly improve traffic flow. Right now, if you want to turn right and there's somebody in front of you who's going straight on, you're stuck there waiting. So this will allow you to turn right. Moving on Jackson Creek Parkway going northbound and then turning left onto 105 in a westerly direction, there will be 2 left turn lanes, and then the right turn lane going to the east will be extended. So that will again significantly improve the turning operations at Jackson Creek Parkway onto 105. So that hopefully the intent there is that it will limit some of the queuing that is currently experienced. There's also going to be some restriping of to accommodate a dual westbound left turn lane from 105 onto Jackson Creek Parkway. And then there will be a southbound right turn deceleration lane that will go into Laughing Lab Way, which is the first access into Monument Junction. That will be a right in, right out only at that point. Next slide. Moving further south to the Fat Tire Drive access, which is the first access really into Lot 5. This will be a full movement intersection because Fat Tire Drive goes into the development on the east side of Jackson Creek Parkway. So that will be a full movement intersection, and there will be a right turn deceleration lane there and a northbound left turn lane. So they're the principal improvements that will be implemented by this developer from Fat Tire Drive north to Jackson Creek Parkway and 105. Next slide. And then at the south entrance to the apartment area, Oktoberfest Drive, that will also be a right in, right out only, and there will be a southbound right turn deceleration proposed at that intersection. Next slide. So consistency with the comprehensive plan. Some of this is a bit repetitive in Mrs. Snow, so I'm not going to go through this slide in a great deal of detail, but principally to say that the comprehensive plan shows this as a mixed use land use, and the sketch plan was approved based on this land use designation. So it was approved as being consistent with the comprehensive plan in terms of the proposed mix of land uses that are on the sketch plan. So that's the criteria with the sketch plan approval that was approved as being consistent with the comprehensive plan. There are a variety of policies which promote a wider range of land uses, more better utilization of land and more flexibility and so on. Next slide. I just want to focus a little bit on one section of the comprehensive plan, which talks about residential attached, because we reference this in our project statement, and we got some criticism at Planning Commission about the application of the use of the term affordable housing. So we're not suggesting that this is affordable housing. That has a very specific definition by HUD, and we are saying this is attainable. The phrase actually used in the comprehensive plan is a more affordable housing alternative. And in the context of Monument, at the bottom right there, I have what I just got from the internet today of the average house price. It's about 750. You can see figures of about over 800,000, depending on where you go. But the average house price in Monument is high, and the majority of the existing housing stock is single family residential. So a more affordable housing alternative is something that's different to what's there already. So an apartment provides a different housing type of housing, to the point there, a mix of housing options. These types specifically refer to garden apartments. So I've kind of provided a couple of definition of what's a garden apartment. So it's a low-rise apartment, and low-rise in this context, high-rise is 12 stories and above, mid-rise is 5 to 7 stories. Low-rise is considered usually 4 or 3 stories or less. So this is considered a low-rise apartment. And garden apartments, it has more landscaping, as I noted before, and usually surface level parking and often a walk-up configuration. And that is a picture from one of the websites which shows an example of a garden apartment, which is very similar to what we're proposing here. So garden apartments are anticipated in the comprehensive plan in a scenario where they can provide a transition, as I've highlighted here, and improve the mix of housing options and provide a more affordable housing alternative. Next slide. So in summary, we think this project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, not only in terms of the overall Monument Junction project, which was approved as being consistent with the mixed use designation in the comprehensive plan in 2020. It's the same comprehensive plan, that hasn't changed. The PUD is also consistent with the multifamily land use designation that was on the sketch plan. In fact, we've reduced the area, we've reduced the potential number of units, and we are, while we're at the maximum density that would allow in the sketch plan, we are on a net density basis. Once you take out the roads, we're actually less than that density. In addition, we're less than the maximum height we identified on the sketch plan. We identified 50 feet. We're at 43 to the top of the roof. If you use the definition in the code to define building height, we'll be at 36 feet. We believe we have an appropriate relationship with uses internally in the site and surrounding, because really the surrounding land uses for this development are the uses that are within Monument Junction. It's got the commercial uses to the north and single family higher density residential to the south. As noted in the comprehensive plan, the attached single family residential, including garden apartments, can form a transition between those two types of uses. Already referred to the fact that the master developer is taking care of the immediate needs on the road improvements. That is well beyond the 20% of traffic that this development would add to the Jackson Creek Parkway and surrounding network. The traffic report that was identified, the trip generation that was identified in the traffic report for the sketch plan was actually assuming a slightly higher number of residential units than we are currently proposing. And all utility services are available to the side. So that's the summary of my presentation to date. And I want to just circle back on one aspect of the discussion at Planning Commission, or two aspects actually. Mr. Hours made the recommendation to deny this project with very lengthy discussion, particularly regarding the distribution of uses within Monument Junction, basically saying that the intent of the comprehensive plan was that this would be primarily non-residential, not residential. I would say that ship has sailed. The sketch plan approved the distribution of land uses having the majority of the land uses being residential. In addition, I would say that Mr. Hours at the March 11 Planning Commission meeting said that the project had many positives. To have this change to mixed use is good for the community. Present homeowners would not have to look at ugly commercial buildings. He voted in favor of the sketch plan. And so I found his comments on this project a little disingenuous. The next thing I would like to point out is that there was some discussion at Planning Commission about a compromise. Have we thought of a compromise? And when we met with Save Monument Group, we talked about a potential compromise. At Planning Commission, I was unable to commit to that because the discussions between the applicant, the master developer, their financing partners had not got to a point where they were prepared to say, yes, we can do this to compromise. That has changed. They are now able to say they have worked on the figures more. There have been a lot of discussions since last Wednesday night, and they are willing at this point to remove one building from the Jackson Creek frontage. That will remove 24 units from the development, taking it from 264 to 240 units. It will reduce the density from 24.7 units per acre, as we're currently proposing, to 22.5 units per acre. So that compromise solution is something we can commit to with this development at this point. So it was unfortunate that we weren't able to get there prior to the Planning Commission meeting. It was a detailed discussion, a lot of late nights doing calculations, and but the conclusion has been reached due to work between the master developer and the applicant, that compromise can be reached. So the option is to remove a building from that Jackson Creek frontage. So there are 4 apartment buildings there proposed today. With our current plans, we would reduce that to 3 buildings. The clubhouse would stay as planned, the single-story clubhouse. And we hope that would address certainly the concerns we heard from the Save Monument Group regarding the feeling of the massive buildings adjacent to Jackson Creek Parkway. I still stand by the perspective rendering we showed, that the plans would not block the mountains, and I don't think the remaining buildings will block the mountains. But I think that removal of a single building will provide some relief along Jackson Creek Parkway. So that is our proposed compromise solution that we would like to present this evening.
Thank you. Questions from the board for the applicant or town staff?
Why not just listen to the citizens and remove the multifamily aspect and make it something that the town actually wants? I don't understand why we wouldn't compromise in that way. I've received approximately 50 emails and messages as a trustee. Literally every single one about this project is saying they do not want multifamily home, and they recommend that we deny this. A project like Burger Works coming up, I've received over a dozen emails. Some of them are completely against it. Some citizens are completely for it and excited, and some are kind of in the middle. They're worried about traffic concerns. That's generally how this goes. I have never in my time of being a trustee received unanimously 100% voice from the residents saying they do not want this approved and they do not want multifamily. In terms of, well, that's my one question at first.
Well, we are working with the existing sketch plan, which was approved, and it was approved with the intention of putting multifamily residential development. So we didn't have any objections at the time of the sketch plan from any neighbours to the multifamily residential components. We didn't have any real questions or objections to that from either. I'll hesitate on Planning Commission. Mr. King has been consistent in his concerns about density when he was on Planning Commission and to date. We didn't have any questions from the other planning commissioners or from the board relating to that density or that land use. So we have moved forward, as has the master developer, in good faith that zoning has been approved, and as has this applicant, who is not in the habit of coming into areas to try to change zoning. They prefer to go to locations where the zoning is in place, that has been through the public process. Those uses and densities have been accepted. And so to try and turn the table back to say we don't want the multifamily residential, I think is inappropriate. And while I hear some neighbours express that concern, we did have meetings with a neighbour group, the Save Monument Group, and they said pretty unanimously, we are not opposed to multifamily residential. We don't want to stop development. We are concerned about how this development fits in with monuments, the scale, the density, and the proximity to Jackson Creek Parkway. So it was more about the design of the development rather than the land use.
Stevens?
Yes, I heard some, this may be a question for staff. I heard some concerns about water. And this is being, the water's going to be provided by Woodmore. Has Woodmore expressed any concerns about their ability to deliver water for a unit this size?
Well, I can answer that.
Okay.
So we obviously have to provide a will serve letter from Woodmore Water and Sanitation District for the provision of both water and sanitary sewer services They have provided that. The master developer has an agreement with, they have to enter into a supplemental agreement for the provision of that water. And part of that is paying Woodmore Water and Sanitation District a large fee for the provision of that water. And that is all in place based on this amount of development, obviously more than we're actually proposing now, because it was based on the an initial sketch plan was a preliminary will serve letter, which was more multifamily residential. And the current will serve is based on the 264 units. So yes, they have indicated their ability and willingness to serve the development.
And one more question along those lines. In this summary in the northeast corner, it looks like you have a swimming pool. Is that
Yes.
actually part of the plan, or will that is just more of a marketing
No,
sketch?
it will be part of the plan. There will be a pool, yes.
Okay.
Trustee Ramos, one second. Trustee Ramos, did you have another question? Okay. Trustee Shading?
I don't have a lot of time. So with you removing building number 2,
Mhm.
is if I'm coming down Jackson Creek going south, where building number 2 would be that's the one that most impacts the mountain views, or is it not?
So I would argue that it does really impact the mountain view
Yeah,
based on the
okay.
perspective, but it would be the nearer buildings tend to have the more of the impact. So the clubhouse, the building next to the clubhouse is building 1, and so building 2
Right,
is the
okay.
next one, and 3, then 4. So our proposal was to, probably take out either one of the 2 middle buildings, just to provide that kind of break relief. So yes, I mean, removing building 2 would allow more of a vista through the development towards the mountains.
Thank you.
I'd like to address the setbacks.
Certainly.
So first, the sketch plan design that we were shown originally, and the layout of all of your design, I thought was really cool. It's significantly changed, obviously, since then. And had we gone along the path of the original drawings that were shown, the apartment complexes would be far set back off Jackson Creek. And when it got to the northern side, they would be elevated because the land there has not been lowered to street level. And there's that little bit of incline or decline depending on the direction you're going. So as far as the setbacks go along Jackson Creek, this will fundamentally change the look of Jackson Creek from Struthers and Baptist all the way to 105. And despite your drawings, I have a hard time believing that you will be as far set back in appearance as any of the multifamily housing or commercial development along the southern part of Jackson Creek. And I would like to refrain from us getting to that point. So my question is what can you do on this piece of land to push the entire development further to the west so that there is a similar buffer as the vistas or any of the other commercial traffic or commercial buildings along the southern part of Jackson Creek Parkway? Because this is entirely too close.
Well, I can answer that in 2 ways. As I noted, the vistas is set back 20 feet from the property boundary
Now,
along
listen,
Jackson Creek.
It's not. Okay, when you drive along it, and I've gone through this process because I know people who've lived there. If you go from the sidewalk 20 feet, you still have an incline of at least 20 feet before you get to the building.
Yes.
Okay, that you're not going to have that here. I mean, from the top down view, and I just don't believe it's going to look the same.
Well, if I could go back to the slide that has the cross section, that's exactly what you'll have here. So you're correct that from the edge of the pavement on Jackson Creek today, you have approximately 20 feet to the property line, and then you go up a fairly significant hill because the vistas are set up in elevation, which these buildings won't be. They will be pretty much maybe within a couple of feet of the grade of Jackson Creek Parkway. So they're not going to be elevated about 10 feet above Jackson Creek Parkway as the vistas are. And you have the distance from the edge of the building to the property line. So we have our 15-foot setback, but the actual distance total from the building to the edge of Jackson Creek Parkway is 40 feet, and approximately 20 feet of that is within the property, and approximately 20 feet of that is made up of the sidewalk and the parkway, the green, tree lawn alongside Jackson Creek Parkway. So it is a very similar scenario to the setback that you just referred to of 20 feet and 20 feet to the vistas. So that is one area that we can agree to disagree, but there is a very similar distance from the edge of Jackson Creek Parkway to the building in this case. And like I said, this one is not going to be elevated approximately 10 feet above grade. In addition, we have constraints on this site with the utility easement on the west side. As I said, it's 55 feet, so that narrows the site considerably. So we have looked at alternatives and moving the buildings back, but we start getting into pinch points for the parking. So our suggested compromise, which we felt was a better approach to addressing the concerns that the neighbor had, was to remove the building. So that was the compromise that we felt was achieving more objectives of reducing building mass, limiting the impact on views as much as we could, and providing a bit more of an open vista there. So we can't really move the buildings further back. The site is too constrained in a east-west direction, and there's too much of a pinch point there. So it's just something we looked at, but we believe we're meeting the setback requirements as well as having the average of 23 feet from Jackson Creek Parkway, from the property line, I should say.
I just want to clarify for my own knowledge. You would just have to remove the density. You would have to
Yes, we
lower
would
the
have to
density, but it's completely possible to work with the town.
Plausible is in
I just wanted to clarify because you were saying you can't. So, but you could
by
just
financial
lower,
viability.
yeah, you could lower the density and just move and give us a bigger setback. It is possible to
It
do
would
that.
reduce density even more, and we felt
Correct.
that the better way to reduce density was to remove the building.
So we could do it. It's
Yes.
just something you're not willing to do.
Yes, because the impact on the site's density would be too great.
Okay, just the way it was worded, it sounded like it was something that wasn't possible to be done, but it is
Yes,
possible.
it is plausible, but
Mhm.
not financially feasible.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
So the removal of one full building, could you explain what the financial impact of that is, and then how I assume that's going to actually make these units more expensive, correct?
No, and part of that reason is because like I said, it has been a combined effort between the master developer who is selling the land to the applicant, and
Okay.
there has been financial discussions to make that balance financially
Okay.
for the applicant.
And just to be clear, I didn't have an issue with that necessarily. I bring it up because I feel like several times tonight, and with all due respect, Mr. Snow, you reiterated this rhetoric as well, that Monument needs more affordable housing. And it's one for the project to meet code, the comprehensive plan, those are all different issues and things that we're going to talk about throughout the evening. I don't appreciate being told that Monument needs more affordable housing. You live where you can afford. And so to dilute the per capita income of a town by saying we need more affordable housing is not the right thing to do for me. That said, I realize that this isn't necessarily affordable housing, so I'm not criticizing it in that sense. I want to be very clear because I don't feel like Monument needs more affordable housing.
I would put it as a more affordable option as opposed to being affordable housing.
And I would clarify that statement by that those words come directly from the town's comprehensive plan. That's not from the planning staff. The words "a more affordable option" comes from the comprehensive plan.
So can I go back to
Certainly.
the density? Being that you guys were approved for a minimum of 15 dwelling units per acre,
Mhm.
wouldn't the conversation around the finances with a potential buyer for this property started off to see if 15 was a viable number? Because obviously if your reduction of one building knocks it down 2 dwelling units per acre, how many buildings would have to go to make it 15, which is what we approved you for originally, 15.2. You didn't have to go max. You chose to go max, which
Mhm.
seems to, I mean, obviously it makes the most money for you and that's understandable. But given that you've had the opportunity to go down to 15, what would it take for you to go? Wasn't that a financially viable option at the beginning? Because if it wasn't, why would you have asked for that as a band?
Because again, as I stated when we presented the sketch plan is a 30,000 foot view of what we could potentially do, and then we honed down on the details. We have, as I mentioned, reduced the overall number of units throughout the development by 20%. On this particular site, we have reduced the acreage by 2 acres. So we've reduced the overall acreage for the multifamily. So we have effectively reduced the potential number of multifamily residential units from the 12.7 acres, which could have had 25 units per acre, to the 10.7 at 25, which is equivalent to a net of 22.8 units per acre. So we have reduced the density. I don't believe that the starting point necessarily was 15 units per acre, but I can ask the master developer to comment on that in due course. But if there had been an issue with the 25 units per acre on this site, it should have been discussed and addressed at the sketch plan. That was the opportunity to take issue with that density and do something about it. But that was approved. And so this master developer and this applicant have moved forward in good faith that there is an expectation that they can get that density on that site. All other things being equal.
I don't want to speak for another trustee. I believe the question was, by presenting 15 dwelling units as a possibility, you should be able to provide that without without being financially bankrupt. If 15 was what you were approved for, that was a range. Why would you, if you can't financially do that, why would that be an option? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Because that's a sketch plan. You
Yeah.
don't have details yet. You
But
don't know what it's going to
That-
require or
why not
cost.
say 1 dwelling unit to 25 dwelling units per acre?
Well, similarly, as
That gives
other
the
areas-
citizens and the previous board and planning commission the idea that this is the range of possibility, but from what I'm
It
hearing
was a
now
range of
is it's not a
possibility.
range of possibility.
It was a range of
Because it's
possibility,
not
but
financially
now
feasible to have,
we're looking at
15.
a specific, just similarly as we had a range of possibilities for each of the other residential areas on the property. And we did not go to the bottom or the top of the range in those necessarily. Some we were closer to the top, some we were closer to the bottom. It's a range which we have to work within when we get to detailed site design. That's why we provide a range at the sketch plan stage. That's the purpose of it. It's supposed to be conceptual in nature. Doesn't mean we have to come in at the lowest possible, and it doesn't mean we have to prove financially that lowest possible part of the range is not viable. We are entitled per the zoning to come in at the top of each and every one of those ranges. We haven't done on some of the other areas, and we're not even at the top of the range in this area, top of the potential number of units. So it's a zoning discussion, and like I say, if there was a concern about that 15 to 25 units per acre range, it should have been addressed at the sketch plan.
but ma'am, respectfully, we are residents. This is a position that we all volunteer for. And same with the town. When we are presented with a range, 15 to 25, I believe a reasonable person that's not in this industry, that doesn't know every single fine print of how these things work, we see 15 to 25 and we say this project is going to be, there's a potential it could be 15 and there's a potential it could be 25. But it seems to always go at the very max of that. And to say that it's just a range and it doesn't really matter, I mean, that's disingenuous. And when you ask, well, why wasn't it disproved? I just think common sense kind of says that it's a little bit tricky for the people up here and the residents. When we see a number of 15, we expect that that's a reasonable possibility that 15 could happen. Like, that's just person to person. It makes sense that instead of, or you should just say 25 is what it's going to
At the
be.
sketch plan level, we didn't know what could potentially go there. we were in a slightly different market then. We submitted in 2019. The market for apartments has increased, as you're probably aware. At that time, it could easily not have been apartments. It could have been maybe a townhome development or something like that. We didn't know what was going to go on the site, so we had to provide a range of options for the whole development that could be marketable in the future. And the project that is before you today is for this density, which has now just been, we have reduced at the dais to 22.8 on a net basis, because like I say, that we are at a 2-acre reduced site area from the original. And that this is to be reviewed as being consistent or not with the sketch plan. And my argument is that it's entirely consistent with the sketch plan and the zoning and the comprehensive plan.
And the acreage was reduced by those roads, correct?
Yes, roughly by the roads, yeah.
Right. So when you first went into this with the original acreage at 240, that would put you at 19. And so when this thing was taken at that amount, originally you were looking at that original acreage in the numbers, right?
So we were looking at the 12.7,
Right.
And we had assumed the maximum of the 25 units per acre in
Right.
our analysis, and certainly in our traffic analysis, it assumed 280 units.
Right. And okay, so right. So and if that acreage was still the way it was, and it is still acreage that's there, and there's no more people that are there, it really would factor down to 19 divided by 240.
The original 12.7, yes, I hadn't done that
Yeah.
calculation,
Yeah.
but yes.
Well, I did.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
I have a question.
sir.
One of the things that makes this interesting is the idea that it comes with, you guys are going to help us widening the roads for Jackson Creek and
Yes.
the intersection there. What is the timing of that widening? Is that, are you going to be doing the apartments first and then widen, or how, or the kind of conjunction together, or how does that?
I am
timing
going
go?
to not get myself in the muddle I got myself in at Planning Commission, and I'm going to defer that question to Mr. Stimple with the master developer, because it seems to be a never moving target. And I understand that the public improvement agreement to secure the funding for those improvements was recently approved. But beyond that, in terms of the timing, I will let somebody from Classic Homes, either Mr. Stimple or Mr. Lloyd-Alt, respond to that, if I may.
All right, thank you.
So I just want to, we did talk about the sketch plans in the September meeting. We also did talk about changing some of our zoning in the July meeting. And I think that this project is a good example of why some of those things need to happen, because it's not, you know, if we want to talk about density caps, or we want to talk about that, we can do those things, but we can't do them now in this process. Now is not the time. So I think that we need to push towards density caps and towards, you know, how much of our existing residential units can be multifamily and how many can't, so that they have a framework to work within and we have a framework to work within, and we're not just up here all arguing about something that has now gone almost 2 years. So thank you.
I completely agree with that. Is there any other questions from the board for staff or?
Yes. Collector roads is what this is. This is a question that could most likely, I guess, for staff. I don't know how these work. I don't know when it changes, but considering we're using collector roads as the 20 feet, you know, over here, we had that. Is it still up? Or it was up there earlier. Does that classification of this road change, since it's going to be doubling and having more than double the traffic on it? Does this change the classification of that road?
Yeah, we don't have our traffic engineer, but let's see if Mark or I can answer. Can you ask the question again?
Yes, the question is, we're basing everything off of this being a collector road. Now that this project is being built, with us being told that the road is going to double in width and it's going to double in the traffic that it'll be able to allow, the traffic coming to and from, will that change the classification of the road? Because in my mind, that means that the setbacks will need to be higher, because it's going to potentially be a different classification of road. I don't know how this works, so it's a genuine question.
Unfortunately, our traffic engineer would be best suited to answer that. He's not with us. But
I can answer the question if you like. The planned expansion of Jackson Creek Parkway is to a major collector classification. So that is the plan. So when I reference major collector in my presentation, that is the planned cross-section, 4-lane cross-section of Jackson Creek Parkway. And that is what is being planned by the town and being reviewed by the town. They have their design consultants, FHU, traffic consultants looking at that right now. But the planned ultimate condition of Jackson Creek Parkway is to be a 4-lane major collector.
Which is generally 20 feet.
Within the Regency Park overlay, it's 20 feet. Here, with this being a PUD, we set our own setbacks, but yes, that
Correct,
would
but
be a
it's
20, per the Regency Park, it would be 20 feet.
so 20 feet. And this would not fall with that because you have a building that's 17 feet.
We have one building that has a pinch point, which is less than
So it would
20
not
feet,
fall.
but the average setback is 23 feet, as we noted on that
But
plan.
I know,
which
but it's-
they all
but it would
exceeded
not
except
fall into the 20-foot, which we generally have for the major collector setback requirements.
yes, at that one point of the building. At
So,
one
but
point,
just,
one building.
just, it would not then,
No.
because it doesn't matter if it's one building or all, it's all the plat.
No,
We're approving.
we have requested in our PUD, because we set our own standards, that's what a PUD does. We have requested a 15-foot setback. So that all our buildings will fall within that 15-foot setback as we have requested on the PUD.
So again, the previous zoning was 20-foot setbacks, not the current
previous
zoning.
Not the current zoning.
Thank you.
Is warming.
And
I'm usually freezing and
The last one was how cold I was blowing on my hand. And now, so I came later. And it's hot.
any other questions from the board for staff or the applicant?
Maybe Classic will answer this one. The answer to the road issue is just what is, how long to build out on this project?
I think that's probably best.
Yeah,
for
okay, yeah.
advertising.
So at the same time, they can answer the same question. That's fine.
Mr. Stipple, would you like to go ahead and address those?
Hi, Doug Stimple, Classic Homes CEO, and we're the master developer. A couple of points. We don't know exactly what the build out's going to be. The market's changed dramatically in the last 6 months. So I just cards face up. I don't have a crystal ball. When we went into this, we were expecting that the residential would take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to build out. There's approximately a total of 335 single-family residential. And so depending on what the absorption is, maybe 3 to 5 years. So the apartments, if they were to be approved, they'd be under construction. They probably take 12 to 18 months to bring on. And then you have residents that begin to occupy. We've got several of the commercial pieces that are currently under contract or sold. And those, I know at least one of them wants to start next summer. I know that there's a second one that wants to start next summer. And then there's 2 of the Westerly commercial parcels, and we're not sure when those will be sold. We're not sure if we're going to sell them. We have a couple of other ideas for it as well. So I think an important aspect of all this, in Trustee Ramos, I know you indicated that you're new to this and you're not, and I understand that it's hard, but price of ground is set by density. So the maximum overall density on this was over 700 units. We're barely over 5. But you pay for what's allowable. So when we bought this ground, it was zoned for multifamily for up to 320 units. It was zoned for residential for significantly more density than what we are proposing. And so for the community to get to vote, and for the question to be, why don't you just listen to the community and do what they tell you? That's not the role that the community plays in this. The community plays the ability to have some input. And we take that into consideration and address it as best we can. As long as we stay within the allowable, then I think we have to go back to the review criteria. And for perspective, and I think this is a really important perspective, when this got processed, this wasn't controversial. We've been caught in this. There was one letter of opposition. One. That was it. And it was meet with the town. Everything's great. We like what you guys are doing. We appreciate this, yada, yada. You spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in planning from that point to where we are today. And so now there's opposition because let's be honest, Mr. Trustee, everything in Monument is controversial right now. And so to suggest that we're here today and it's somehow, the implication is almost like somehow it's your fault. Well, no, we bought zoned ground in compliance, put forth a good plan, had no objections, and here we are.
Mr. Stemple, will you address the timing of the road, the parts you're expanding, and then Mr. Foreman, if you want to add more to the total expansion?
So I think it's important to put into context that the FHU study from Higbee to 105 is at full build out. It assumes full build out along Jackson Creek Parkway. And so everything's assumed to be occupied, right? And to come up with what is your respective percentage shares. Well, for us, FHU assumed build out at the maximum density allowable under the sketch plan, which we are not achieving. And they came up with a range of what our fair share of the cost of those improvements would be. And that range has, and they will fine tune that as more things get finalized. But let's call it 28% in the interim to 20 to 22% long-term. And so how do we deal with that when there isn't a funding source? Well, we thought the most appropriate way to deal with it would be to come in and make a commitment to the town that, look, the most problematic stretch of Jackson Creek Parkway is basically that northern section where everyone's turning left onto 105, wanting to go right onto 105 from Jackson Creek northbound, need another left lane from westbound 105, et cetera. So we came in, we looked at it, talked with the town, talked with FHU, and said, if we agree to make these full improvements, then do you agree that this puts the road condition in a better condition tomorrow than it's in today? And the answer was yes. So we have entered into an agreement, subdivision improvement agreement with the town, for which we have put up two $2.6 million bonds. And that's to secure interim improvements that'll be done basically in concert with the fast serve restaurant that you're next, the apartments, some of our improvements that we're bringing on the east side. Ultimately, we have to do all the improvements that Ms. Barlow walked you through. Some we can do just with the town's approval, the interim improvements. All we need to get is the town's approval. Some of them we need the approval of CDOT to do on 105, and we're actively working towards those right now. But what we have said is we'll bond for them, which means we need to build them, and we'll do the interim improvements that there's an exhibit, I do believe, that was in your presentation that showed what the interim improvements are that we're going to do right now.
Yes, so those are in conjunction with construction
Yes.
going on at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing item, so I will open it up for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this item?
You guys doing? Matt Brunk, I'm resident of Monument for 10 years. And so I wanted to speak and say a couple of things. Redmond, trust your gut. Trustee Ramos, trust your gut. When you are listening to the community, I must respectfully disagree with Mr. Stemple. I do have a lot of respect for him and what he's done in the community. But when he says that's not the community's role is whatever the community wants it to be. The methadone clinic was approved and the community didn't want it, and there is no methadone clinic. So to say that the community's role is this or that, that is not for him or anyone else to decide. And I also did not plan on saying this. But as Ms. Barlow stated that the Commissioner Orr's words were a bit disingenuous because of previous statements made about the initial sketch plan. Trustee LaKind has already shown that this is quite a bit different than the initial sketch plan. It must also be said that Ms. Barlow time and again has presented something initially only to have it changed for the worse. Trustee Ramos also pointed out that it never seems to come back as the minimum. Trustee LaKind last year stated during the Connexus debacle that Ms. Barlow often initially presents puppy dogs and rainbows, yet we never get anything of the sort. So I would argue that she is the one that is disingenuous. And the reason why we are here now and we have the process from 15 to 25 and we always get there. And so I agree that this isn't necessarily a time for that. However, when we initially presented it and we initially accepted it and when Orris initially said those things, it was presented in such a way to get approval. And so from now on, I say to take anything that NES presents with a grain of salt. And they're the two things that I actually wanted to say here. First, watching the candidate forum, 15 minutes in, trustee and mayoral candidate Jim Romanello stated that he's a fiduciary duty to the town. Unfortunately, I believe that is incorrect. The Declaration of Independence and the words of Jefferson say it best, that to secure these rights, governments instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The only reason why governments exist at all is to secure the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for the people. Trustees, your duty is to the people that elected you and not to the town entity. Your power comes from our consent. It would do well for you to remember that. And Mayor Wilson, thank you so much, but you are here to represent us and not to clarify the statements of the developers. They are all here to explain themselves. And so I find it a little bit inappropriate for you to clarify the developers when you are representing us and not them. That is all I had to say. Thank you very much. You guys have a great evening.
Thank you. Please hold applause or any other comments. Sir, go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Abler. I'm a resident here in Monument for the past few years. One thing I wanted to bring up was actually some facts regarding the high density units that are being proposed. Right now, myself and my neighbor did a little bit of research that any of us can do on Google. And if you search for high density multifamily units near us, 22 come up. And there are 5,247 units that are currently within a 6-mile radius of where I'm standing right now. And of those 5,247, there are 822 that are empty right now. And if we add 224, 264, but she said that they were going to take away a building. Okay. So we're wanting to add more, and how many of them are going to sit vacant? Because we already have some sitting vacant. And so I just want to bring those facts up, and I have those. Very simple, calling the property managers, and I have a point of contact for each of those if anyone would like to see. I just wanted to provide a little additional fact. Thank you.
Sorry, what was your name, sir?
Tony Abler, A-B-L-E-R.
Public, who else would like to make public comment? Mr. Kimple?
Good evening, Kenneth Kimple, 16151 St. Lawrence Way. I apologize for my voice because work from earlier today. I'm just going to bring up a couple things. I'm not going to repeat a lot. I do want the board to take into serious consideration the Planning Commission's discussion that they had and Mr. Orr's, all his findings out of the building code, section 18. Additionally, in section 18, it talks about how we are supposed to decide on the safety, welfare, and what's best for the town in development planning for current and future residents of monuments. So if this goes through and gets approved, we're stuck with it. So, you know, it was talked by Andrea about the view corridor and how this is one building as you're turning onto Jackson Creek Parkway, and it's only going to temporarily block things on the right, but you can see mountains further down. What about the future development plans going down the rest of Jackson Creek Parkway that's going to connect all the way to the Walmart? All of these things have to be considered. Future development, future plans. How does this go into, how is this going to affect future stuff? Future things, major collector. 10,000 trips is what a major collector is supposed to have on it, no more, no less, or no more than that, I should say. By rule of thumb, it's 7.5 trips a home. This is from the El Paso County when I talked to them, planning and traffic studies. So this development, along with the development that's going on to the east of it, that's over 3,700 trips if the build out is allowed. That's 1/3 of the traffic on Jackson Creek that's allowed on a major collector. That doesn't account for the current traffic on there. So how's it going to affect future builds on there as well? Comprehensive plan, page 17, clearly states citizens and area residents are mindful that a broader range of housing opportunities is important to the local economy. Many simply do not like multifamily housing. It says it in the comprehensive plan, so that should be followed. It was brought up at the planning commission. It was asked and it was not answered. Why not 2 stories vice 3 as a compromise? Never answered. In order to keep the mountain views, affecting future development on Jackson Creek. The setbacks do not meet the rules that we are supposed to abide by. If this is approved without adjusting those setbacks, we are setting up the tone for future development on Jackson Creek. To answer your question, curb to curb, 76 feet. Right away, 107 feet for a major collector. Just happened to kind of understand that. Again, take into consideration the Planning Commission's discussion. Take into effect what Mr. Orrs pointed out in section 18 of our town ordinance. And all those, I don't want to go through that long list, but those were key points, how this proposed development does not meet neither the comprehensive plan nor our town ordinance at this time. This is the closest alligator to the boat. There's a lot of plans that have been pushed in for review. You can't say that this is off the table. The discussion can happen right now to affect change. It doesn't have to sit there and go, well, we've come this far. No, we're not finished. The final decision is not made. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like, Mr. Koopman?
Greg Koopman, monument resident. Modify this. I mean, these folks have a vested right they're entitled to what the sketch plan said. However, it needs to still be in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Now, you all have heard CRS 3123-206. The comprehensive plan of a municipality shall constitute an advisory document to guide land development decisions. Probably haven't heard the next part, which is unless the plan or any part of that plan is made enforceable through the municipality's zoning and other land development regulations. It is in our Title 18. We directly say we must follow the comprehensive plan. You are guided in that. They are connected. It is not just an advisory document anymore. It is legal. It is Title 18, and it guides you. You must follow the comprehensive plan. Word for word, it's in there, and it instructs you what you must do. I think there's a win-win possible, but it's not going to be solved tonight. We need to discuss it. We need to make sure it's compliant with the comprehensive plan. That's your duty.
Ma'am?
Bring this down. So Brandy Turner, 2065 Bobcat Valley Court. I was at the Planning Commission meeting last week, and Doug said the same thing he just said, that now that one thing in Monument is controversial, everything suddenly becomes controversial. But if you look at the apartments at Monument Ridge, high density, you didn't see anybody here opposing those apartments. And the big reason is because that area is different than this area. That area was already commercial. That area has a 4-way intersection with heavy traffic already in place. There's ways that you can see how those apartments are going to affect the traffic in that area. So to say that every project now becomes controversial, I think is going more towards him saying, I'm going to build it because I can, not build it because it's the right thing to do. So second, Andrea, on now three separate occasions at meetings that I've attended about Monument Junction has said the same thing. Only one person sent a letter, which may be true, but that letter wasn't responded to. It took 4 months for any response to come to that one person. So I ask you, do you only listen? You don't listen if it's just one person? So if one person brings up an issue, you say, well, nobody else thinks that's an issue, so we're going to ignore it. As a matter of fact, Andrea and I had a conversation about a year ago in this very room talking about the Connexus project and moving Old Denver Highway. And I asked her specifically, could you look into moving the redirection of Old Denver Highway south to include one of the older existing neighborhoods over there? She wrote some notes. She gave me her card. She said, I'll look into it. But I was just one person. I was just one person who brought up that issue. So I sent an email to the planning director at the time and said, hey, I had this conversation, please follow up. And to this day, I've had no response, but I'm just one person. So why is one person ignored if they bring up an issue and that keeps coming back? Only one person said something. Does it matter if 1 or 10 people say it? It's still an issue of the community. And last, at the Planning Commission, Andrew, you talked about having so much success in the past compromising with citizens, especially with the Connexus, and I agree with that. But on the Connexus plan, we sat down before all of these plans were made. We sat down together with a blank slate and said, let's kind of talk about the pros and cons, what we can do, what we can't do, what's going to be feasible. And that just wasn't done on this project. So you ask why there's so much pushback, and honestly, that's the reason why. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. King?
I am Steve King. For the record, I am that one person that wrote that comment letter. I have 2 pages of notes here that I now have to kind of wing it because this caught me a little bit off guard. Yes, we'd been talking, Save Monument had been talking with Mr. Stimple about solutions, and taking this building out was talked about, but then it just kind of disappeared until just tonight. So I have to change stuff up a bit. And I want to say one thing. I'm always fair. I always try to be fair to anyone. And the first fair statement that I will make is that other than Trustee Ramos and Trustee Shaning, the whole rest of the board voted for this density on this site. And, you know, we've got to start at the beginning in order to move forward with where we're going with the town, because you know, if the density wasn't granted, we wouldn't be standing here right now. Now we're coming down to a matter of what's allowed and what's not allowed on a PUD. So a building's going to get removed, and see, so here's a problem that we're coming up with right now. Because a building's going to get removed, does that mean the building just comes out and there's a hole there? Does that mean the rest of the site gets moved around? There's also building, I think 5 and 6, maybe would be better if one of those went so that the buildings on the south end can shift back and increase the setbacks. Does that change the approval for a final PUD? I mean, this is catching me all off guard, so I don't have any answers for that right now. And I just want to make some other points too regarding the density on this site. Taking out the streets does lower the density, but the streets are taken out on the vistas and Monument Ridge. So that's not really a fair statement to make. The density inside the site is what the density is inside the site. With regards to the setback, I'm going to disagree strongly with Andrea on the vistas. It's 76 feet from the curb line. I measured it. physically, I measured it on GIS. The setbacks to the buildings are more like 35 feet and there's 35 feet of right of way. So there's not 35 feet of right of way in front of Monument Junction. So the appearance driving down the street is really what all anybody cares about. They don't really care where the property lines are at. Jackson Creek Parkway is a parkway, and a parkway is supposed to be an open space with, lots of open space on both sides. So my questions really are what happens to the rest of the site? Again, this caught me off guard. I wasn't ready to talk to this about this building being missing. I'm super happy that they're willing to compromise on this. Where it goes from this point forward, I'm really not sure how the whole site works out, but if we're just taking a building out and leaving a hole there, I don't know if that's sufficient or not, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, and I will commend Classic for coming to the table for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the in-person public? Okay. Okay.
Attention, talking to this board. My name is Barbara Canet. You weren't there, but we had a meeting about the warehouses where 1,100 people gathered. And the only reason there weren't more is they were turned away. The facility would not hold anymore. As a resident for over 3 decades, I am appalled to sit here and hear my mayor, who's supposed to be supporting my town, agreeing with the builder and not supporting Mr. Ramos and his comments. He's new. I appreciate everything he said. The rest of you, Romanello, you're running to be mayor, aren't you? And you're approving, from what I heard, also, right? You approve. Don't know yet. You're leaving Monument. Don't wreck it on your way out.
Thank you, ma'am.
We are passionate about our town. Are you building up behind Jackson Creek Senior Living? Is that true? Huge development.
Ma'am, do you have comments regarding this development?
Yeah.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Same thing with the warehouse. Traffic.
Okay.
Traffic. Yeah. Are you driving there at certain times of day when the high school lets out?
Ma'am, we will have a rebuttal period after comments to answer those questions. Okay.
Traffic, huge, huge. On that intersection of Jackson Creek Parkway and 105. That should be 4 lanes before we consider building on the east and the west. I think he also has the land on the east and has a number of homes going in there as well. The traffic is going to be huge. Steve is the brains of our group. I'm the hothead. I love it here. Been here for decades. I was here when there was no Safeway, there was no Walmart, there was none of that. And until the warehouses came along, I never fought anything. But I stood up for those warehouses because I could not believe what was happening to our town. And a lot of that was traffic too. A lot of this is traffic. I realize you bought the land. I realize that you can use the max of whatever you want to do. But I guess I'll say the same thing to you that I said to Connexus is maybe consider the people that live here. Consider the people that love this town. Absolutely love it. Maybe you don't have to do. You said we won't be blocking the mountain views. I cannot imagine if you are driving Jackson Creek Parkway, sitting in a car, that a 3-story building and the roof is not going to block your view. That's impossible if you're sitting in a car. So I guess my comment would be that we don't need more multifamily housing. Certainly not going to win any friends. You may have only gotten one letter, but I can guarantee you there is an entire community of people that if you want to see an uproar, you'll see an uproar. We've done it before.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sharon Stratton, Monument resident. Number one, I would like to strongly recommend that the Board of Trustees put a moratorium on all of this that has to do with the building with Classic Homes until at least the new year when we have a settled board, or at least until after the elections. Because right now there's too much confusion. There's so much controversy, and you all know that. The residents of Monument, as this woman said, the majority of the people do not want this. I'm sure these people know that. Do they care? No. And they never will. So please think about it, and with everything that's going on, please put a moratorium on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other in-person public comments, sir?
Good evening, everyone. My name is William Tamaja. I'm the Whataburger franchise operator, the next applicant. And so I'm going to have a couple remarks and try not to cut off my nose despite my face being the next applicant. But so I own the property that we are committed to developing. And so I am a stakeholder in Monument, in the community. And we don't have enough time to go over all the reasons on why I'm excited to come to Monument. But I can tell you that where we are coming in this development, we are excited to be there because of the masterfully planned development that Classic put together in conjunction with city staff. There's obviously a lot of complex pieces with traffic and all the overlays that were thoughtfully crafted and put together. And so we're looking forward to being a part of that. And so in addition to being a stakeholder, I'm also a empathetic developer, owner, operator, in that, you know, coming into these things, you know, I mean, in society at large, right? We want clarity on codes, on regulations, on all these things. And for society to function in a orderly manner, we need consistent application of the codes. And so, you know, as I'm putting my piece together, they're putting their piece together, and the ambiguity of what's required in this master development, those layers have gotten clarified at each approval process, right? And so we get to a point where we can really spend dollars and design according to the code. And so we have done that, and they have done that. They didn't ask me to speak. I'm just thought I needed to stand up and speak. And so I appreciate everything that's being said. And I know this is emotional. I think it's really cool that they have found a compromise with a group that is not happy with what's going on, but there's some middle ground. And so, you know, I always try to operate from the standpoint of treat other people the way you want to be treated. And if anybody was standing at that point, got those approvals, they would hope that once they stepped in front of this board, that they would have the code applied in a consistent manner. And so, you know, I ask you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in person, ma'am?
That they can provide. Got it? All right, thanks. So I've got 3 points. One is that I read that increased water demand is contributing to the increased radium, and I don't think that's been solved yet. Second, Woodmore Water and Sanitation District Manager Jesse Schaefer recently said that one well that was producing 100 gallons a minute is now lucky to get 40 gallons a minute. And third, a recent OCN, Our Community News article. This is from September 12th, and this is the Woodmore Water and Sanitation District update in Our Community News. Dan Namella, who's a consultant representing BBA Water Consultants and is helping them work to update the district's long-range plan. It's updated every 5 years. Now remember, this is just September 12th, okay? Namella told the board, and I'm quoting this from Our Community News, that some previous projections of water resources were too optimistic. Aquifer tests done by the state found more impact from wells than expected. The district's long-range plan done in 2006 predicted a need for many wells. He goes on to say that drilling new wells was becoming prohibitively expensive and riskier, and existing wells were beginning to fail. I have a well on my property, and I'm concerned. I'm on the Denver Aquifer. 10 of the district wells that draw on the Denver Aquifer are beyond their expected usable life, and the district has already used the best well sites. The Arapahoe Aquifer is declining by 16 feet a year, Namella said. So I'm a little concerned. I think we need to, as citizens, we need to be talking more to Woodmore Water and Sanitation, who keeps saying, yeah, we'll provide for this, we'll provide for that, we'll provide, you know, there's a whole queue of projects that I've heard Woodmore say they can support, but can they? This doesn't sound like it. Our previous projections of water resources were too optimistic. What's going to happen when all these extra multi-family and, you know, I mean, there's going to be more, because we're going to be talking to you guys again in a couple of weeks about the annexation up by the Ridge, or, you know, by Monument Hill. That's, you know, more multi-family housing. And then just a couple others beyond the water. The one person comment that we heard earlier, I couldn't make it to the last Board of Trustees meeting, and I'm so sorry I couldn't make it because I had sent all of you photographs of Beacon Light. I'm that one person that really objected to that trailer place going in on Beacon Light. Not because, I mean, the trailer sounds like that's great. What scared me was the fact that semis are going to deliver them. There's no easement there. And I'm a person who has ridden my bicycle on Beacon Light to get over to the Santa Fe Trail. There's a bus stop for kids, you know, right there on Beacon Light. What's going to happen when semis are going back and forth? So I hope at very minimum, you guys can maybe say that the semis have to come in at 4 in the morning or something. And then the compromise is nice, but again, we didn't get to see what that compromise actually looks like, you know, because I was at the Planning Commission meeting. So now we don't know if that's going to move things, or, you know, if it's going to just leave one gap, or is it going to adjust everything? So how do we vote? how do you guys vote yes or no when we don't really know what that is going to look like yet? So I'm just saying, I don't think we're quite ready. And I'm really worried about the water.
Thank you. Is there
Thank you.
anyone else who would like to make comment in person? Marco?
Good evening. For those that don't know me, I'm Marco Fiorito, Ann Arbor Way and Promontory Point. The water hobby horse, my hobby horse was beaten, so I'm gonna skip it. The only other thing I'll bring up from a historical standpoint, and when we served on the comprehensive plan committee a few years back, one of the examples that was presented to us in terms of multi-use that I kind of keyed in on way back when was an example of multi-use was where you have shops on the ground floor and then houses on top. And I know from a comprehensive plan, when that was an example that was presented to us then, I know as a group, we thought that was a great idea. We thought this is a great example of what multi-use is, because it reflects what Monument kind of is. So it would be downtown Monument with potentially one floor of housing above it. The reason I keyed in on it is because it reminded me of Europe. When you go to Europe, you've got nice pedestrian boulevards with shops on the ground floor and then houses up above. And I thought that would have been perfect for Monument to keep that old town feel, but with a modern twist, if you will. So just a historical context for why, as a comprehensive plan committee, we kind of keyed in on multi-use. So thank you very much. Good.
Thank you. Any other comments here in person? Okay, Mr. Anderson, will you bring up Miss Wagner? Miss Wagner, you can come off mute and speak. Online, we have Miss Jennifer Wagner. You are currently on mute. If you would like to come off mute, please go ahead. Mr. Anderson, will you move to the next hand raised? Miss Gina Marie, your last name is cut off. Can you may come off mute and speak?
Hi, thanks. Gina Marie Fatora. I am a resident in Jackson Creek. I've got several topics. So let's start with my first comment. Most residents don't want this, regardless of the rhetoric we're hearing stating it's a benefit to the residents, to the town. We don't want more multifamily homes or dense housing. Mr. Stimple asked, why is this so controversial now, right? Well, while I was at the Planning Commission meeting, I understood that the sketch plan was delivered very vaguely. In fact, I heard that it looked like a bunch of bubbles. It did not define what it would look like with this current development taking place. I also heard a comment about bait and switch. So, it's not sitting well. So I just gotta say, I would caution our planning commissioners, our staff, our BOT, with any future applications from Classic. Based on the way this is being delivered, it's just not sitting well. Water, I know we just talked about water, but how can we approve additional development of, all these homes, many apartments, when we have water restrictions imposed on our current residents? It all doesn't make sense. the view, the development, you know, they said 40 feet between buildings is where we'll get to see the views, right? Between the buildings. And as you're driving along the Jackson Creek, even if you're driving along, you've got a one-story building, you can't see the mountains behind that one-story building. I don't know, you know, if you paid attention to that or not, but you can't. You can look at any building that's right there, whether it's, you know, Taekwondo, whatever, you can't see the mountains behind it. At the planning meeting, you know, a commissioner or ours provided a very specific and detailed reasons, some of which weren't even on the summary that was covered when, you know, first presenting here in the meeting or online. I didn't find it in the deck. And the analysis that he did was so in-depth that I don't understand how anybody on this board or even the planning commission would support this. It doesn't make any sense. Mr. Ars, you know, he supported why this shouldn't happen. Maybe more changes are needed. You know, removing one building isn't sufficient. 3 stories, I know that at the meeting, we even asked for 2. Even 2 would be high and block the views. This plan does not meet the comprehensive plan. It's not in the best interest of our current residents or our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, would you bring up Ms. Wagner again? Ms. Wagner, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. I just wanted to raise a couple of issues. I know at the planning meeting, I mentioned the runoff from commercial properties may affect the Prebbles jumping field mouse or the Prebbles meadow jumping mouse. Ms. Barlow kind of shrugged it off at that meeting, and I looked at the monument notes, and there is indeed a letter from the United States Air Force Academy expressing the same concerns that I had. I have not heard anything from any of the planning meetings or from the applicant about how they have addressed those concerns or if they have worked with the Air Force Academy. Also, I'd like to point out that here at Village Center, where I live on Red Mica Way. I grew up in Monument. There are two streets to get out of this neighborhood. One is Knollwood Boulevard. The other is just across the street from the Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints. Both of them are on 105. If we have congestion on Jackson Creek Parkway and we have congestion on Highway 105, what happens if there's a fire in our neighborhood at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? How are our residents going to get out? We have 2 ways out. That's it. I know that this project in phase 1 has proposed extending roads to Jackson Creek Parkway. However, that has not happened. We're talking about Plat 5 instead of Plat 1. This needs to be addressed. This is a serious safety issue. And the only other comment I have is that Ms. Barlow, you certainly put this sketch in sketch plan. You know, you came to us in 2020 with a proposal for 2-level apartment buildings. And now you're saying 43 feet. 43 feet is the average height of a 4-story building, by the way. And now you're saying 50 feet. Can you say bait and switch? This is why so many people turn out to these meetings, is because people like Andrea Barlow and NES keep coming in with a plan that everyone would like, And then as things go along, they keep changing it until we have to live with some monstrosity. No, this is Monument. We deserve better. This is one of the most desirable zip codes in the state. Why are we subjecting ourselves to substandard architecture, to whatever might go in whatever strip mall in America? No, we deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, can you bring up Steve Torgensen? Mr. Torgensen, you can unmute and speak when you're ready.
Yes, good morning, or good afternoon. This is Steve Torgerson. I live in Monument, and I had a couple of things that I wanted to bring up and express some concerns. One of them is, and I know that this is only briefly mentioned in the comprehensive plan, but that is how our school district is going to deal with the impact of a multi-use development like this. And when we have situations where our schools are bursting at the seams, and how does that impact our overall community? I also wanted to bring up issues with the night sky. The comprehensive plan does talk about the night sky. And as this development comes in, it's going to be bright. It'll be bright on the freeway as you're driving across. It'll be bright on Jackson Creek Highway or Jackson Creek, and it will definitely impact the darker skies that we currently enjoy. And that's something that with this development will not be able to go back in time very easily. And so those are two things that I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you. Those of you online that have spoken, if you would please take your hand emoji down so we know who hasn't spoken. Mr. Anderson, do you see anyone else further down the list that has their hand raised? Oh, okay, excellent. Thank you. At this point, we will close the public comment portion of this hearing and give the applicant the opportunity for rebuttal.
There were quite a lot of comments, and obviously I'd like to try to address all of them. I'm first going to talk about a couple of common themes and take the opportunity to defend my professional integrity, something a profession I have been working in for 30 years, and I really do take exception about some of the comments that were made. I think there needs to be an understanding of what a sketch plan does and what it doesn't do, and what also the code says it can do, and what the planning commission or the board could have done with this sketch plan at the time if there was there's very little neighborhood opposition. When we went through the sketch plan, we had a neighborhood meeting. We had neighborhood meetings in previous renditions of the sketch plan. And we had specific meetings with the adjacent Village Center Metro District. So we had multiple different meetings with the residents through the sketch plan process. Not one expressed concern about the multifamily residential on the west side. The primary concern was about the residential on the east side. The primary concern was the connection to Knollwood that we had originally shown as going directly from Jackson Creek Parkwood to Knollwood Drive. We are still proposing a connection there. And there were other concerns about the Metro District wanting us to provide a park for the benefit of their residents on this development. And so they were the general scope of the objections at that time. But I'm going to read directly from your code. The purpose of the sketch plan review is to evaluate whether a proposed subdivision conforms to the Town of Monument Comprehensive Plan, and if it will be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. The sketch plan was approved. That conclusion was drawn based on the plan that was presented. The plan that presented has hardly changed, hardly changed. There has been a slight realignment of the multifamily area and the commercial area. The acreage of the multifamily residential has reduced. The number of units proposed in the multifamily residential has reduced. There has been no bait and switch. This is as true to the sketch plan as to about within 90% of the sketch plan. There has been a slight change in the area distribution. The sketch plan review also provides an opportunity to determine whether a subdivision will comply with the town's review and approval criteria, and to address any issues of concern early in the review process. That is what your code says. That is the purpose of the sketch plan. So any issues that had that came about at the time of the sketch plan should have been addressed at the sketch plan, not at this stage. The sketch plan is a conceptual version of the preliminary plat. Conceptual, sketch, conceptual. It is our best estimate about what we intend to do at that time. It applies to this sketch plan. It applies to any sketch plan that NES prepares on behalf of their clients. It represents the client's vision for the property, and it represents the best estimate of how that will evolve. If there are specific concerns during the sketch plan process, we make adjustments, we make changes, we change densities, we add buffers. Those sort of things come in at the sketch plan stage. We did sketch plans for Sanctuary Point, address density transitions, address buffers. We would have addressed issues of concern that were raised at this sketch plan stage. We addressed the primary concern, which was the direct connection of Norwood. We changed that. So that is the time to be making these broader changes to the basic parameters of the zoning that goes along with the sketch plan. So I just wanted to emphasize that that is the purpose of the sketch plan as set out in your code. We are not making this up. We are not inventing our own sketch plan process. It is set out in your code. We follow that code. We follow the criteria and the requirements that are placed on us by the town's code and as reviewed by town staff. So I just wanted to address that from the outset. So moving to some of the other comments, I think it was Mr. Kimple who said that the purpose of the code is to look after the safety and welfare for current and future residents. All the emphasis is on the current residents, all the emphasis. There are future residents, people, and at one point, most of the current residents, and all of the current residents at one point were a future resident. So the plan, the objective is to plan and provide housing for all residents, existing and future. And you will have heard before, many people have said, my children can't afford to live in Monument. My children can't afford to live here. The teachers, the school district said, our teachers can't afford to live in Monument. So these are the real issues, the people who work here and want to live here as well, or whoever were brought up here and want to live here. There was a discussion about traffic, whether it takes into account all the future plans for the area on Jackson Creek Parkway in particular. The traffic study projects to 2040. It has to project into the future. It has to take into account every single proposed development, existing zoning, potential future development that is on the cards in Monument, which is pretty much everything in Monument. It has to address all future traffic. So yes, that is taken into account. And that is taken into account in terms of the designation of Jackson Creek Parkway as a major collector, in terms of its planned capacity, in terms of the existing users of Jackson Creek Parkway and the future people who will be on that road. So that road has been planned not by Classic Homes, not by NES, not by our traffic consultant, but by the town's traffic engineer, traffic consultant, FHU, who have been brought onto the board to design Jackson Creek Parkway. Sorry, I'm just pausing. I will give credit to Mr. King. I believe he is always fair, and he does talk about what he understands. I encouraged him when we met, if you're sending a letter to us and you are representing Save Monument, say you're representing Save Monument. He always very clearly says he just speaks for himself. He's not speaking for others. I encourage him to speak and for the broader group. If it's a broader group he's representing, we can work with that and we can understand that. And we did have a meeting, and that meeting with the Save Monument group actually was requested for several months. And Mr. Stimple may talk to that about that process of how we got to having that meeting. And so we did reach out and try to have a meeting sooner. There were some questions at the end there about, well, I do want to talk about the lady who was commenting on Jackson Creek Parkway being the only 2 points of access from the neighborhood to the east. Obviously, that's not directly related to this development, but it relates to the traffic on Jackson Creek Parkway. We are providing an additional access that will provide a relief to get from Knollwood to Jackson Creek Parkway as part of this overall development on the east side. And this master developer is going to be significantly improving the current conditions on Jackson Creek Parkway, well beyond the impact of the traffic from this development. That is a clear benefit to the town of Monument. That intersection would not get improved otherwise. And it's already failing. Everybody knows that. It's already not needs improvement. I think it was Ms. Wagner said that we promised 2-level apartments in the sketch plan. We identified 45 to 50 feet of building height. You can get a 5-story apartment in 50 feet of building height. We did not promise 2-story buildings at any point in our presentation, because we know as planners that a 2-story apartment is not something that people develop today. It is at least going to be 3-story, possibly 4 or 5-story. So we did not promise a 2-story apartment. There was no bait and switch there. We have said consistently that it's going to be multifamily apartments of a height 45 to 50 feet and with a density of up to 25 units per acre. A couple of the final points gentleman made, he did actually make 2 points which hadn't been addressed before, were schools. We did consult through the process with School District 38 as is required, and at each phase of this development from back to 2015, and they have consistently said that they want the fees. They don't need the land. They have the land. They need the fees to help with any future school development. They have a site in Forest Lakes. They have additional land at Bear Creek. And they have recently, not so recently now, I guess, but probably in about 2018, they did a strategic plan where they identified what their future needs would be based on the assumed growth in Monument. Their consultant, the consultant for the school district, and I had lots of conversations about all the development that we were working on, both in Monument and around Monument in El Paso County, in the Woodmore area and elsewhere, to understand what the likely growth would be. So that has all been taken into account in the school district's planning, and this development will be paying school fees. His other comment related to, got him out of my mind, so I'll come back to that. The lady, Miss Wagner, again, related to the impact on the mouse. Mouse habitat. She was very specifically referring to the mouse habitat within the, let's call it the circle that's encapsulated within the I-25 off-ramp. We do not flow in that direction. The Air Force Academy expressed concerns in their initial letter. We responded to those with an explanation of where our stormwater was being detained and how it was being released, and they didn't have any further comments following that discussion. And I still can't remember the gentleman's second comment, so unfortunately I can't respond to that. Sorry? Oh, the night sky. Thank you. Lighting. Yes, obviously the town has very strict lighting requirements to address the night sky, the concerns about dark skies, and they are dark sky compliant, and we have to accord with those requirements. We will be meeting the town's lighting standards through this development. And I think there were various comments about water. My response to the water comments are the same as I made earlier, that Woodmore Water and Sanitation District require fees of the developer to help them as a water resource fee, effectively to help them secure additional water in the future. So that is how Woodmore deals with the water capacity questions. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions, or if Mr. Stimple has a couple of rebuttal comments as well.
I'll be brief. I think we've identified the issues. And we really regret being in this position. We really do. We've been developing in El Paso County for 31 years. We've been developing continuously in Monument since 1995. I imagine a number of the people that spoke tonight probably live in one of our homes. We're good residents wherever we are. Go look at our reputation. Look at what we've done with Monument. Look at what we've done quietly with the town to try and help with a variety of things. I've had discussions with Mike about donating the remaining commercial piece in our site to help with a rec center that's needed for the elderly. And we don't like this. When people, we don't want to be here in a contentious manner. And I want to address just one or two comments that I think are misleading. When I said one person wrote the letter, that's fair. It was Mr. King. There was no Save Monument at the time. But his comments were deemed by the planning staff that they actually pushed us, encouraged us to bring the buildings forward, to put the parking behind the buildings, because generally that's considered good planning. So a lot of the points he raised, they didn't even ask us to address. The one lady said, we sat down on Connexus and we came up with a plan. Well, who would we have sat down with? There was nobody that raised their hand. Nobody. The site plan gets approved. The zoning gets approved. Then we buy. And I think it's really important to understand that the way the process works is you can't answer all the details until you go through significant engineering, significant drainage, significant grading, layouts. You spend a small fortune to do that. But when you buy a zoned piece with an approved sketch plan that frankly was unanimously approved, and there was one voice, one letter, it wasn't an uprising, there had been no objection to it in previous sketch plan discussions, we didn't have anyone to go sit down with. No one was objecting. I'm not saying one voice isn't important. I want to really make that point. One voice is often very important. But we didn't have a group to go sit down with. And so a while back, I started to reach out to Mr. King. Unfortunately, he's a busy man, so am I. And I don't know why we couldn't connect earlier, but we didn't. But we finally did a couple weeks before Planning Commission. And we talked about the issues. We agreed to disagree, and we agreed to do it reasonably and honorably. And, I think the only thing that I would take a little exception with is that he said it disappeared until tonight. I tried to keep him informed. I texted him fairly continuously, told him where the issues were. We were straightforward about it. We're working on it. It's not simple to take away density. The implication of a lot of these comments is that somehow we don't care. Well, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of my team here today. 5 of us are Monument residents. It's not fair. We do care. More importantly, I think we establish it. I think some of the finest developments in Monument are ours. Promontory, Sanctuary. This one's going to be a really fine development. If people didn't want multifamily, the sketch plan and the zoning shouldn't have been approved. But to throw it at us now is really hard. And it puts us in a very difficult spot. We are not maximizing density. We have significantly less units than what are allowed. You pick one project, 110 acres out of 84, and say you've maximized density. Well, now we haven't. We've reduced it. But one, and we're below on the rest. So I regret that we're here. But I do believe we meet all the criteria. I do believe that if you go through Commissioner Hour's very detailed motion, you'll see that most of them aren't review criteria. What he talked about was density. What he talked about was the percentage of residential versus commercial. Yeah, that's what the sketch plan and the zoning says. We didn't vary from it. So on behalf of Classic, we're sorry we're here. We're sorry that we're having to put the town out and the people in the town out. But this is awful late in the game to be changing the rules. Thank you.
Mr. Stemple or Mr. Barlow, did you guys have any ideas on, one of the questions was about the spacing with removing that building. Is there any ideas for that?
With the overall site plan back up. But I will tell you that one of the ideas is to lose one of the 4 buildings and not change any of the others. Why? 2 reasons. One is if we lose, okay, so if we lose building 2, so as Andrea.
We had a different slide on that, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's one.
Slide 9, I think.
Right there, there you go. So the pool and clubhouse, we don't consider that as fronting onto Jackson Creek, it's single story or shorter, better, and orients more towards the north. So you see 4 buildings along Jackson Creek Parkway. Candidly, the CEO of the apartment developer told me he didn't care which building he lost. Mr. King and the Save Monument crowd and I have talked about building 2. He doesn't care if it's building 2. He doesn't care if it's building 1, if he's willing to do it. The reason that I suggested elimination of building 2 is now you have a very significant corridor through the middle of the project. They don't want to change the rest of the building locations. Why? Because they spent a fortune and it's engineered and it's approved, and it now would require retooling where your water goes, your sewer goes, where your gas and your electric is. And I think they're being very accommodating, and candidly, so are we, because we gave them a significant price reduction to get this concession, because we are trying to be responsive. And so the proposal is to eliminate 1 building. The proposal is to eliminate building 2. What will they do with that space? They'll put some landscaping. They'll do something nice in there. But it's not material to making a decision tonight. We're saying there'll be 3 buildings along Jackson Creek, not 4. And whichever 3 remain, they will remain as they are located on that sketch. And that was the proposal.
Thank you. At this point, does the board have any more questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Rivera, are we as board members during this time allowed to accept verbal agreements for final plans?
Yes, thank you. That's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. So we closed,
Yes, public comment has been closed.
so this evening you sit before us as a quasi judicial commission. As we talked about many times before, you're both judge and jury. And so let me talk to you a little bit about the different components of those roles. As jurors, you're here to hear the facts, and the facts are basically comprise of the record, and that's what the most important piece here to think about is the record. What's the record? From what evidence can you base your decision? And the record for this is the information that you received in your packet regarding this development, what you heard here tonight. And I'd like to have you limit your decision to those 2 bases. Again, what you received in the packet, or the packet that was distributed to everybody as part of this meeting, what you hear tonight. So make your decisions based on that, please, the record. And then second, as a judge,
Your options are to approve with conditions, or deny. And in making that, in choosing one of those pathways, I'd like you to either, whatever decision you make, please focus on the review criteria. So as judges, you make a decision, and the better judges explain why they made the decision, explain how they got to that decision. And that is by using those factors in my packet on pages 87 and 88 of 158, the 18.03450 and the 18.03460. And use those factors in D1 through 13, and those factors in D1 through 7. And whether you approve with conditions, or deny, please support your decisions based on those factors, preferably one from each bin. So now your question, can you approve with conditions? Of course. And so you would accept a motion and approve with a condition, whatever it may be. And specificity would be very helpful. And so that what happens is that condition becomes part of the agreement. It becomes, and then we need to, at some future point, determine whether that condition is met. So the more specific the condition, the easier it is to determine whether it's been met.
I asked this question because we have a picture in front of us, we have a plan in front of us, and that is not what we are voting on. We are being told to just trust that one of these buildings will be taken away, but we do not have that photo. So I think that it's pretty common sense that with us having a fiduciary duty to the town, nobody in good faith could accept or approve a plan that we're not looking at. We are looking at this plan. So if anybody feels like the compromise could potentially be approved, that's not what we are voting on. This is what we see, and I'm not comfortable making any even approval decision, and I don't think anybody should be comfortable without seeing an image that's different than we see here. I think the fiduciary duty to our town goes both ways. For us to approve something just on everybody using their imagination is not what we are supposed to be doing up here. I would also like to state or ask a question. The meeting that was brought up, I believe it was March 11th of 2020 was the Planning Commission meeting where everybody was approved. I just want to clarify some things that were told that were miscommunicated to us. So I'm looking at the minutes for the March 11th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting that had unanimous support, that nobody opposed. And we were told time and time and time again, I've written many meetings, or if you're watching this as a resident and you're watching it when it's not live, please go back and see how many times that we were told that there was no opposition at all. I will now read the Planning Commission meetings from that, minutes from that note. Give me a second. Commissioner King was concerned about the density and the number of homes. Sorry, it's taking me a second. I had it pulled up, but I have a few other things here. And to the statement about hours, Commissioner Hours, we were told, and you can go back in the meeting if you're watching this afterwards, we were told that Hours said many positive things about this project. In fact, the minutes say that Hours said there's many positives to have this change to mixed use. So Commissioner Hours during this time had stated that what he thought was positive from what I'm reading was that we were going from completely residential, which was what was asked for in 2018, to this PUD. He thought that it was a positive to change it to mixed use. And then we were told that Mr. Hours had no opposition. It says clearly in the notes that you could look at on the Planning Commission minutes for this meeting that he said he was concerned about high density. You can look, if I'm looking at the correct meeting, March 11th, 2020, Mr. Hours had stated that he was concerned about the density. So there's many things that we're told.
Are you referring to Mr. King?
No, Mr. King was the one I had mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to propose, I agree with Mr. Ramos in the sense that what we're looking at is not what is being verbally proposed to us, and I feel like things are incomplete. So I'd like to propose that we, come back at a later time with a final, actual decision on how this is going to look, because right now making a decision based off of what we think, I think we can be accused, also we can, the town could be accused of bait and switch that here's what we, I think there's too much potential for mix up. I'd prefer that we had a more definite idea of what was going in.
Okay. Trustee Shading?
I would like to again reiterate that, and I guess I have more to say about it. I really feel bad that everyone's in this situation. The public, us up here, the developers, you guys. And I think that we're here because of a flawed system. And I owe you an apology, Mr. Snow and Ms. Barlow, because I don't remember ever seeing the word affordable in the comprehensive plan. But there it is. And our codes are out of date. We've talked multiple times about doing some type of workshop for updating our codes to be more in line with what the residents are asking for. We've talked, I even brought up at a prior meeting that to have the Board of Trustees have the opportunity to review a sketch plan and then to forego that opportunity makes no sense to me. But we did that. I mean, we talked about it. We also talked about sending more requirements for sketch plans. If we did these things and updated the comprehensive plan, overhaul our codes, as I think it was Ms. Fatora online said, she's a resident. They're not asking for these things. But the staff and the developers are working within parameters that are not up to speed with what the residents are asking for. So we need to fix these things. But we have to be very careful, I think, not to re-victimize everybody. So I'm satisfied with the negotiations that were made. I don't know what that looks like moving forward. But I appreciate the fact that you've made some concessions.
I will correct, it was Commissioner William, I think I'm getting that right, Wilhelm, stated his issue with it being mixed use. He felt that it should be left as commercial. And then it goes on to say that his concerns about noise and building heights as well. Later on, there is 4 public comments. One, Red Stevens is concerned about drainage and money for schools. And then I could go through the other 3, but we were just told multiple times, and if you're watching this meeting, go back, that there was no opposition. These are just the people that showed up to this meeting. These are just those people that showed up to the meeting. We were specifically told that there was only one person on the planning commission, which was not true. We just looked through. It was not true. And then we were told that there was no opposition. We were said that there was only one letter. That happened again and again and again. You told us only one letter, only one person spoke up. But the comments here from the citizens say that they were concerned.
Can I just say one thing? So, Mr. Stimple, I'm sorry, we're in this position too, because when we originally saw this before it was presented to the town, with what I thought was a very detailed, I guess it was a sketch, but it looked pretty detailed to me. There was, I think you had full acknowledgement from me that this would be a cool kind of thing, right? The overall, how you did it. And this is obviously prior to it being submitted, and it changed. The position of the multi-dwelling units shifted from the northern and western side of the overall plot on the west to the middle now, and it's much more condensed. It's in the pictures, the difference between the 2 locations of the sketch plan, which I recall being where what you presented. I wish it hadn't changed. I think we probably wouldn't be in this position right now. That's just my opinion.
Okay. I was just gonna say, back to my original comment, I think things are incomplete at this point. I think, what we're seeing on our presentation in the PUD is not what we're hearing verbally. There's different density units, there's different drawings here. I think, we would be remiss to try to presume what it would look like. So I would like to make a motion to table this until the plan can get updated and be represented in a more accurate fashion, and then they can come back and represent.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to make a comment before we make a motion. First of all, we're hearing a lot of comments from the people of the town right now at this late date. And perhaps we should consider going forward during the sketch plan process, maybe getting word out to the public of when they should be saying their opinions or concerns about a development. Because it seems that people aren't aware of, what the right timing is to submit their concerns. And I am a bit surprised that an ex-trustee in the audience is actually bringing these concerns to the board now when he was an ex-trustee and knows the process. Secondly, I'd like to mention that I'm the only board member that has been on the board for over 8 years because of the change in our election date. I've been on the board for 8.5 years. I've seen multiple developers come before the board, and I have to say, Classic Homes and Miss Andrea with NES have been really professional and have extreme attention to detail. And to criticize them for their lack of professionalism is not appropriate. They've done a great job. And I think that we can definitely, work together to Trustee Stevens' point to make sure that we come back at a later date and make sure that everything is agreed upon and everything is complete. But I do not appreciate the lack of, the unprofessional comments from people criticizing Classic Homes and Miss Andrea with NES.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Go ahead.
Mr. Simple, in the bigger picture of things, because I think that your comment about this being 10 acres of 80 and we're focused on this 10 right now, but in the bigger picture of things, what was the original density and what was the overall lowering, taking the big picture into effect?
Yes, on all 84
Yeah,
acres.
yeah.
On all 84 acres, we were, if you took the maximum range,
Right.
we would get 745 residential units.
Okay.
Which would consist of like 320 apartments and then the max density. What we're at now is 597, which is 20%.
Okay. And, I just want to say that when I bought my house in Village Center in 2007 and lived there till 2019 for 12 years, one of the first questions I asked my realtor was actually, what can go there? And he did the research and came back and said, it can be commercial up to 3 stories high. Do you want to buy the house? Then I bought it. I asked my questions. I did my diligence before I bought that house. And I think that whether it was 3-story commercial or 3-story apartments, I just don't think anybody would like it anyway. I think that's just kind of where we're at. But when I'm looking at 18.03460 and 18.03450, like Joe talks about, and you look at the zoning and the ordinances, this fits, but that doesn't change the fact that there's people that don't want it. But so it does put us in the conundrum that we're in. And I do, again, appreciate the concessions and coming to the table and lowering the density as well.
Trustee Stevens, you made a motion. I would like some clarification. Are you looking for them to, What I don't want is postpone this to have them come back with a piece of tape over one building. If it does not change the actual total layout, is there a reason to postpone it versus adding a condition?
And yeah.
So it's not gonna be symmetrical, there's just gonna be a hole there?
Yeah, they said they wanted a viewpoint there. That's what the point.
Right there.
The redoing of the.
So the buildings are not gonna be symmetrically spaced out, they're just gonna be a big hole right there.
Well,
Landscaped.
it will be landscaped.
Well,
we
yeah.
have something in it, but my point is, that's what we're talking about, elimination of one building. Alternatively, don't take my condition, don't take the concession, and I'd still make the suggestion that our 264 unit plan meets all the criteria.
Technically, it does. Mr. Rivera, as you were describing to Trustee Ramos about, approve with conditions, disapprove. Do you see any, if this was approved with the condition of removing that one building, that I think what somebody was trying to get at was that's solid. It's binding. It works, right? I mean, I think that's what people were concerned about.
My sense is that the record is, I guess the question is there a meeting of the minds? Does everybody have the same understanding? And it seems to me that that the concession is to remove building number 2, not change any other design element within the project, and to replace building 2 with adequate landscaping. If that's a motion, I think that that it seems to me that under a test of reasonableness, that's sufficiently specific.
Okay.
The citizens of our town knew the comprehensive plan, and when we were initially told what this project was with the sketch plan that looked, I say we fundamentally disagree that it was, I think the wording was, it's hardly a change. I believe this was a very big change. I think we fundamentally disagree on that. And when citizens look at this, we're not professionals. I'm not trying to be absolutely stubborn and mean. We're not professionals. We don't know this the way you do. And when we are presented with something that looks, I think, different than this, looked reasonable, and then we also know our comprehensive plan, and at that time we could cite our comprehensive plan if we're active residents, and we can look at the sketch plan that we're given, we had a much different idea of what this project would be. I know I did as a resident. So I just think if we want to be great residents to our town and we want to work with the town, I think we just have to listen to the town and see that this is not what people believed was happening. That's, I think, the truth. I've been emailed time and time again or messaged about how everybody feels tricked. This is not what most of us had imagined. We're not the professionals that you are. We don't know every single plan, but we do know that your side, our side, everybody, we want to work together, but at the same time, we both knew what the comprehensive plan is. And this is blocking the view over there. I could cite, half of what the planning commission had cited for their reason of denial. There's so many valid points there. And I do not think, as with a fiduciary duty to the town, that we can approve something that could potentially harm the town.
We still have a motion on the table. If there's no further discussion about that motion, is there a second?
What is the motion?
Mr. Trustee Stevens, we
Yes, my
clarify your
motion, because of the uncertainty of the situation, the sketch, what we're presented as the PUD is not what we're discussing. My motion is to postpone this until things can be worked out and then come back at a later time.
Okay.
In order, so when we have to post notices for these hearings. However, if you continue to a date certain, we're relieved of that requirement because everybody knows when the hearing's going to be continued until. So if you could perhaps work with Classic and identify a date certain for the continued hearing, we could avoid the expense of renoticing.
Okay, so, I don't know. I can
I mean, could we
propose the
come back
next
later
meeting.
tonight? Could we do it
November
after
7th
the
is
next?
meeting. November 7th is the next
I guess
meeting.
that question would, it seems to me that do you think that's enough time to rework it? Then that's my motion would be
So
to
clarify the motion to
continue
come
to
back
November
on
7th.
November 7th.
Yeah.
I want to be fair to the developers and not waste time. My only concern with that is I don't want to waste anybody's time. And if that was the only change, I am fairly confident after the meeting and reviewing everything in the packet that I would not be changing an opinion and I would be denying. So I don't want to waste anybody's time is my only concern, is that if that was the only change, I want to be respectful to the applicant as well. I don't want them to spend more money and time and effort if that was the only change. That personally would not change my opinion, I don't believe.
Then you would vote no on this motion or not support this motion, but
Yes, I mean, if there are other issues that people need to discuss with Classic and we want to have those meetings, that would give additional time for other discussions that Mr. Stemple said he did not have the opportunity to do back during the sketch plan.
But then are we going to come back in 2 weeks and be in the same boat all over again where there are more changes that we now have to? I mean, if this is the only change, I guess I'm fine with tabling something to have more discussions, but now that change, we're basically saying we're changing the plan and we need to re-review it, and that's a different.
I'm just saying what we're looking at now is not what's being proposed. And so that's why I'm offering the opportunity to get everything cleaned up and straightened out.
You're wanting to see a sketch just
Without
without building two. Is that what I'm clarifying?
Well, not only that, but if there are other concerns that people have that they want to talk with Classic, this is an opportunity for them to, to discuss that.
Do we have a second for that motion? Okay, that motion dies. Is there any other comments or does somebody want to bring forward another motion?
I motion to deny ordinance number 18-2022, an ordinance approving a preliminary and final planned unit development for Monument Junction West, Lot 5. Just so I'm clear, do I have to give all reasonings now?
Not yet, we're gonna get a second and then.
Okay,
and then
thank,
vote if I could ask the board to provide a basis for their decision.
yeah, I appreciate explaining that.
Is there a second? Seeing none, that motion dies. Is there any other discussion or another motion?
I'll move to approve ordinance number 18-2022, an ordinance approving a preliminary final planned unit development for Monument Junction West Lot 5 with the modification of the removing of building 2. Is that adequately spoken?
I think just to make clear, with the modification of removing building 2 in its entirety, replacing building 2 with adequate landscaping and not making any other changes to the building site plan.
Okay, with the modification of removing building 2 permanently and replacing it with
Adequate landscaping
landscaping
and no other change.
and no other changes.
Okay, we have a motion and a motion. That motion is modified. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Ms. Hogan, will you take roll?
Trustee Ramos?
No.
Trustee Shaney?
Yes, with the condition.
Mayor Wilson?
Yes.
Trustee LaKind?
No, based on criteria D13, I do not believe with the setbacks that this is consistent with the town's comprehensive plan.
Mayor Pro Tem Elliott? Mayor Pro Tem Elliott?
Yes.
Trustee Stevens?
Yes.
Trustee Romanello?
Yes.
That motion passes 5-2.
I do have a question. I was told during our ethics meeting that we had about the possibility of, when we have to recuse ourselves. So how would that relate, Mr. Rivera, in a situation where somebody was receiving funds from an applicant? Would somebody have to recuse themselves before a vote? I am really not aware of how this works, so I am asking how this would work.
Generally speaking, it's, and this is just, I wasn't expecting this. I was not expecting this question. But basically, I don't recall the statute, but it's a direct, personal contribution to their person. And I don't, in my sense, and I think I'm anticipating a little bit what you're getting at, I don't believe it applies to political donations.
So if people on the board had accepted money from the applicant, it's fine. They can still vote.
I understand.
Okay, that takes us to ordinance number 19/2022, preliminary final planned unit for Burger Works. Mr. Snow. Yes, before we get to that, while Mr. Snow prepares it, we will take a 10-minute recess.
We got my staff, we got her staff, and we got professor.
I think it was a good challenge. Go down that.
We are back from recess. Mr. Snow. Mr. Snow, go ahead.
Okay, we are resuming. Again, my name is Sean Snow. I'm going to be presenting the next presentation for the Board of Trustees. This is Burger Works Monument Junction Preliminary Final PUD, ordinance number 19-2022. For orientation purposes, this is the lot that is just north of the presentation we were just hearing. So we heard lot 5. That's the larger parcel to the south of the green polygon that's there. The green polygon is the Burger Works location we're referencing. A lot of this information will be very similar to what we just heard with lot 5, with a few exceptions. Existing zoning, of course, we've established that on June 15, 2020, Board of Trustees approved the Village Sketch PD plan. Within that, there was the multifamily we just went over. There's also Sketch PD. That Sketch PD plan identified the project area as a bank, restaurant, bar, car wash, convenience store, general retail, microbrewery, distillery, office, personal service establishment, pharmacy, shopping center, or small animal clinic. Sketch PD plan from the town's previous land development code describes it as a conceptual version of the preliminary PD site plan. In preliminary fashion, the Sketch PD plan indicates the proposed uses and densities of the property, including open space, parks, and regional trail corridors, and major planned roadways and utility services. February 7th, 2022, Board of Trustees approved resolution number 08-2022, a resolution approving a preliminary final plat for Monument Junction West, filing number 1. Monuments Land Development Code, section 18.01.310, discusses site-specific development plans that are subject to vested property rights, including the approved final PUD, the approved conditional use site plan, or an approved final subdivision plat. We went over this in the last presentation, just have it in here again for informational purposes. Same with this slide, discuss the other related topics and zoning for this site, including Woodmore Water and Sanitation District that will provide both water and wastewater services for all development within Monument Junction. The existing surrounding uses include the YMCA, I-25, vacant land to the south, and the remainder of the undeveloped Monument Junction parcel on the east side of Jackson Creek Parkway. The preliminary final PUD we're here to discuss. Lot 4 of Monument Junction West, filing number 1 subdivision, accessed from Fat Tire Drive and Laughing Lab Way, some unique street names in this area. Traffic control plan, this was a requirement considering that the proposed fast food restaurant is expected to bring in some initial, a lot of traffic initially and then continuing on the site. So I'll go over a little bit of that. Traffic control plan, adequate stacking on site for long-term traffic, as well as adequate stacking both internally and on Laughing Lab and Fat Tire to accommodate the anticipated vehicle volume without impacting Jackson Creek Parkway. The long-term on-site stacking is 44 vehicles, while the event stacking allows for well over 60 vehicles. That will be described in greater detail by Ms. Barlow. We'll go over more of the traffic. Now I'll turn my attention to the comprehensive plan and how it relates to the proposed use. One of the land use policies discusses allowing for a wider array of land use types to meet changing community needs. So staff analyzed that as follows. This fast food restaurant will help meet the changing needs of this community and new residential development in the adjacent areas. It will be easily accessible from Jackson Creek Parkway. Promote infill development on vacant land with attention to the vacant or underutilized land in and around the downtown core. Monument Junction will provide additional infill development of currently underutilized land in Monument. And another policy, protect adjacent residential areas from adverse noise, glare, and the visual impacts of parking and loading related to non-residential development. This site is not adjacent to any existing residential areas. There will be appropriate separation from the multifamily development plan to the south. The proposed residential to the east is separated by Jackson Creek Parkway, an open space tract, and landscaping. Planning Commission and staff recommendations. As referenced, the Planning Commission this past week, they had a motion to approve as follows. Commissioner Auer states, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of BurgerWorks preliminary final PUD based on the findings that the proposed preliminary final PUD is in conformance with the review and approval criteria as outlined in the Town and Monuments Land Development Code 18.03.450 and 18.03.460. That motion was seconded, a vote 7-0. Staff, furthermore, for staff recommends approval of BurgerWorks Monument Ridge preliminary final PUD based on the findings that the preliminary final PUD is in I'm having a hard time reading, is in conformance with the review and approval criteria from the Town of Monuments Land Development Code section 18.03.450 and 18.03.460. As with the last presentation, the entitlement process slide is included to outline information I referenced earlier in the presentation, including when the sketch PD was approved in June of 2020, as well as the plat earlier this year in February. As with the previous presentation, I do outline give the approval criteria for section 18.03.450 for the preliminary PUD. I will not go through all the details here, but it is included as well in your packet, as well as the final PUD criteria from section 18.03.460 for your information here. Presentation will end, and I will call up the next presentation with Ms. Barlow.
Ms. Barlow.
Barlow with NES, representing BurgerWorks, who are the franchisee for Whataburger. Presentation to come up. I will condense this because there is quite a lot of overlap as well, so I don't want to kind of go through stuff I've already been through in terms of the context of Monument Junction. Talk more about the specifics. Okay, next slide. We've established this is lot 4, so it's just north of the apartment site that we just considered. Next slide. And the zoning you're familiar with, we can skip through the next couple of slides, showing its PUD. And the criteria, I think you're familiar with those by now. Next slide. And just to identify that we did show 4 acres of commercial. Next slide. And that indicated a range of uses from retail services, shops, restaurants, medical offices, small businesses, and so on. Next slide. The plat for Monument Junction West, filing number 1, reconfigured the site as we previously discussed, moving the commercial to the north. And lot 4 is one of the 4 lots proposed for commercial on the north end of the property. Next slide. So the BurgerWorks itself is a 1.79 acre site. I just want to point out that that's quite a large site. We've done a number of the Whataburgers in the Colorado Springs area, and this is easily the largest site we've been working on, which allows us to do a couple of things, which I will talk about in due course. One of them is provide additional landscaping and seating areas. We have the maximum building height, which we have identified on the PUD, is consistent with the zoning, but we are actually, the height of the building is not as high as 40 feet. It's a single story building. So next slide. And this is an indication of the architecture of the building. So again, single story. It's a new prototype for the Whataburger. So slightly, next slide, slightly different formatting for their W, which is their brand. So a little bit more subdued than some of their other branding that they've done in the past, and also their materials are consistent with the rest of the Monument Junction project. Next slide. Road improvements, we've talked about those. The next slide. And you're familiar with the broader improvements at the intersection of 105 and Jackson Creek Parkway. The star there shows the site. Next slide. This just talks about the actual intersections serving the proposed Whataburger. So the Laughing Lab Way will be a right in, right out only. There will be a southbound right turn deceleration lane at that point. And then Fat Tire Drive will be a full movement intersection. There will be a right turn deceleration lane installed there, and also a northbound left turn. Next slide. I want to spend a little time, this is something we specifically were asked to address, the opening week traffic control plan. There was quite a bit of press with the opening of the Whataburger at Interquest Parkway. Obviously that was the first store of a Whataburger in Colorado, and it attracted a lot of attention and a lot of traffic. Since then, there's a new store that opened on Dublin Boulevard in Colorado Springs in the end of last month. There will be another store opening at Constitution in November. In the first quarter of 2023, there will be another store opening in Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs. And in the second quarter of 2023, there will be two more at Montebello, which is on the South Academy area, and on Fillmore Street. And then the Monument Junction site is supposed to open in the third quarter of next year, fourth quarter of next year. So by the time this site opens, there will be 6 Whataburgers within the Colorado Springs area, which we believe will significantly reduce the influx of people on that opening week from the Interquest scenario. That being said, we are proposing a number of measures to help with that opening week. The first of those is to provide wayfinding signs. So just temporary signs which will indicate how to get there. So there will be one on the off-ramp of I-25, one on 105 to direct people to turn right, and then coming from the south along Jackson Creek Parkway, there will be wayfinding signs. Next slide. Regarding internal circulation, first thing to note that there will be security personnel at each of the entrances. So there's an entrance proposed off Laughing Lab Way and an entrance proposed off Fat Tire Drive. There will be security personnel at those entrances directing traffic. They will stay there until there is an observed significant reduction in the amount of traffic coming in and out of the development. So it was really there to service that initial traffic coming for the opening week or opening first few days. So the green lines identify the incoming traffic. So they will be directed to utilize the Fat Tire entrance. There is approximately 350 feet of stacking distance on Fat Tire Drive. And then once you're internal to the site, there is an additional 860 feet of stacking. That is over double what there was available at the Interquest site. So the internal stacking, and this is where I was talking earlier about the benefits of the larger site. It's enabled the site plan to incorporate that stacking internally within the site, and also have 3 drive-through lanes. This is the only Whataburger being proposed that has 3 drive-through lanes. All the others have 2. And so that will also facilitate an easier flow of traffic. And then with that, once you leave the drive-through, this is primarily for the drive-through scenario. If you want to come into the store and sit in and eat, then you could come in and park. There's ample parking there. And then directing to leave the premises is the red line. They will be directed to circle around and utilize the full movement intersection at Fat Tire Drive. So that's the plan for the opening week. It's something that the franchisee, Mr. Taminga, has worked carefully with his security people to develop, and confident that it will run smoothly in those first few days, should I say. Next slide. We talked a lot about the comprehensive plan. It's part of the mixed use scenario for this development, which incorporated a mix of commercial, residential, and other uses. Next slide. There are some more specific policies in the plan that relate to commercial development, encouraging them to capitalize on the I-25 interchanges within Monument, which this one clearly does, being adjacent to the 105 and I-25 interchange, and also encouraging businesses, shopping, service, and employment that will help support Monument as the activity hub for the Tri-Lakes region. Next slide. And so in summary, we think this meets the intent of the sketch plan by proposing commercial development in line with the type of commercial development that was presented with the sketch plan project, both in the project statement and in the presentation to the Planning Commission and Board. The commercial is consistent with the mixed use intent of Monument Junction. And there will be the road improvements to support the development. I think we really went through those in detail in the last presentation. And we will have a security, private security, and an opening week traffic plan to support that initial influx of traffic. And with that, next slide, we're happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the board for the applicant or town staff?
I have one question. With the road improvements to support the developments, is that, I tried looking in, so excuse me if it's already written in there, but is that a requirement before this is built to have the roads finished?
So the roads so Fat Tire Drive, and I'm trying to work out your actual question. So the Fat Tire Drive and Laughing Lab Way will be constructed prior to the development, and the interim improvements will be constructed, but the ultimate improvements from Fat Tire Drive to 105 will be phased in over time. So
Okay, so yeah, I apologize. That was my fault. I didn't answer that, or I didn't ask that clearly enough. So I think you did answer it. So the existing road that is to be widened, that's not a requirement that it's going to be widened before this is built. Okay. Can I ask one more question? I think somebody else is going. Chief, if I could ask you a question. I know you are chomping at the bit for Whataburger, so try and take your just your chief hat on right now, not your love of burgers hat. Do you think that there's any concerns with opening week in terms of traffic, opening months in terms of traffic, or even ongoing, that has not been addressed by this presentation?
So, you know, I've actually gone to some of the other location on Interquest just to kind of, you know, answer that question if we're asked. I think as they open up, Andrew made a good point. The other 5 or 6 will displace a lot of that. I guess my question are, what are the hours going to be for the opening portion of this? So I think that will offset a lot of that morning buildup. The one thing I would ask is initially, if we do see traffic, you know, backing up to the street, I'd rather see a Monument police officer than a security guard out there. You know, because we obviously have the authority on the street. They don't. You know, so that'd be one commitment I'd like to get from the business, that, you know, we staff it with either one of our police officers or police service aides.
Thank you very much, Chief. And to clarify, you're saying that's more of the opening month or however long it's going to be.
You know, if we start seeing it get out on the street, you know, we'd want to put a police officer there. That way, if they're just over capacity and, you know, the 800 feet's gone and the 300, is it 300, Andrew? 800. Yeah, if it's the you know, the 8 and the 3 tied up, then we at least have the option, and we can decide if it's safe, if it's a safety issue to stop traffic for a little while until it can clear up a little bit.
So essentially, it would just be funding or paying your department versus, because you know Monument, versus an outside security. It's not really an extra.
And we have the authority on the roadway where a security guard wouldn't have that authority.
And so that wouldn't be an extra fee? That
would be an added fee.
Well, sorry, Chief, I understand that. I just mean versus paying for a private security or them. Okay, perfect. So you guys are completely on board with that. I'm excited for burgers. So this is this is good. Thank you very much for all you. Appreciate that.
before you go,
Yes, sir.
are you talking about backing up onto the roads they're building or Jackson Creek?
Under the majors, the.
On the
Jackson
major,
Creeks.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question. So 24 hours. I don't know other than gas stations that we have another 24-hour establishment for food. So how will you be able to comply with dark sky ordinances if you're open 24 hours?
Not mistaken, all that we do.
Microphone puts one back.
Because you will be in the middle of residential.
Right. So if I'm not mistaken,